Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The beginnings of a future pirate king. What if Luffy was never entrusted to Garp, but instead raised by Whitebeard? Follow a different journey where Luffy grows up surrounded by one of the most legendary pirate crews in the world. Chaos, laughter, brotherhood, and belonging await, all while Luffy still dreams of becoming the king of the pirates. Big shout out to the warlords of this channel: Rodarius Jones, Native Warrior, Claude Lifrace, Neo Wesker 23, Derek Doughty, Zazu Saez, Abdul Raf Ali, N3WT, What If Lord, Black Money Young Leon, Garrick Russell, Case Clark, KSGPL4YZ, and Brian McKenzie. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
After spending time with Kaya, Nami had come to a nice conclusion. She liked the girl. Kaya was open-hearted and truly intelligent, which made Nami smile. A true smile for the girl. She listened to Kaya's tale about her parents' death and felt her heart go out for the girl. She also took in how Usopp had been coming over ever since it happened and trying his hardest to cheer her up with his wild stories. I know all Usopp told me was lies, but Kaya felt tears forming in her eyes thinking about how harsh Usopp had been laying like that about her butler. People do crazy things to protect the ones they love, Nami said, her eyes distant thinking of the things she had done. I just wish he would be honest with me, Kaya said, taking a sip of her tea, looking down to the ground. Nami knew her job here was to keep Kaya away from as much trouble as possible, but she had decided that before Usopp went off with Luffy on his little adventure, she'd make sure they set things all straight. When we get the chance, I think we should talk more with him, all right? Nami asked, picking her teacup up and sipping it. You're right, Nami. I'm glad we're talking. Kaya smiled, happy to have time with another girl for once. I am too, Nami replied, hoping everything went all right with Luffy on his end. How long are you both going to sleep? Usopp asked, while Luffy and Zoro, who were both snoring away under a tree as if a crazy pirate crew wasn't making their way towards the island this very moment. It's not like I have to really fight hard, and if those guys know what's good for them, they won't actually want to fight me. Luffy shrugged, opening one eye, and looked at Usopp, who had his jaw slack slightly. Because you're strong? He asked once he pulled himself together. Nope, because Marco will probably find out some way or another, and they won't like what he might do to them. Luffy laughed, imagining his maw all fired up, his blue eyes glaring down anyone who so much as touched Luffy. I keep forgetting there are people out there watching your back that are a lot stronger than you, Usopp said, rubbing his forehead with his thumb, sighing. She, Pops will help if I need it, but I don't want to have them protect me anymore. It's time that I started to get strong for myself and my crew, Luffy said, looking at Usopp while Zoro continued to sleep, but Luffy sensed that he was actually paying attention. You have one super cool family, Luffy, Usopp muttered, turning to look at the water, knowing that soon a bunch of pirates would be here. You do, to Usopp. Your dad is pretty awesome, Luffy exclaimed happily, and Usopp blushed before rubbing his nose. Yeah, I guess so. I must get my amazingness from my old man. Usopp then took a pose, but Luffy just laughed it off before leaning back on the tree and closing his eyes again. The party should be here soon, so rest while you can, Luffy encouraged, but Usopp shook his head. I'm alright. I'll keep watch for now. He then climbed the tree and kept his eyes out on the open waters. Suit yourself, Luffy shrugged before falling asleep once again. I'll protect this village if it's the last thing I do, Usopp muttered to himself as snoring began once again, indicating that Luffy had fallen back to sleep. When Kaya fell asleep, Nami opened her eyes, sitting up slowly not to alert the girl she was moving. Luffy and Usopp say your butler is untrustworthy, so I'm to guard you just in case, Nami whispered, taking a seat by the door so she could listen to any movement in the dark house. Being a thief, and a really damn good one, Nami had learned to use observational skills to see her surroundings to help protect herself better. Never once in her lifetime, though, did she ever think she'd use those skills to help another person. A pirate wants me to protect someone that has nothing really to do with his goal. What a weird man you are, Luffy. Nami couldn't help but smile, because out of all the pirates she had met, Luffy just appeared so different. It could be the fact that he was so open and honest about what he was feeling and thinking. He didn't have any hidden agenda or secrets, so she couldn't help but trust him. Placing her hand over the covered tattoo on her shoulder, she thought about what was happening back home. If only all pirates could be like you, Luffy, she said sadly before looking up startled, because of a loud sound happening down the stairs. She could wake Kaya, but first it was time to check things out carefully, of course. There was no way Nami wanted to fight whoever was causing trouble in the house. She was just on guard duty. Luffy was the one to kick people's asses. Listening harder, Nami could hear someone coming up the stairs, so she hid as best as she could in Kaya's closet. Hopefully whoever it was didn't see her, and even more so wasn't strong enough to sense her like Luffy could. When the door opened, it was the butler Usopp had told them about. Nami had to place a hand over her mouth to stop herself from shouting, or even from breathing too hard. She watched through the small crack in the closet as he walked over to Kaya and placed his bladed hands close to her throat. Nami felt herself beginning to shake, so she stepped away from the wooden doors so she didn't make any sounds. She knew it was her job to protect Kaya, and leaving the girl to die would be letting Luffy and the others down. Nami was now mentally preparing herself to jump out from the closet and try and fight off the man, but heard his footsteps as he left the room, leaving the door open. Nami looked over at Kaya's sleeping form and sighed, knowing things were going to go bad for the kind girl. Sorry Kaya, I need to go now. Luffy is strong, but I want to be there to help where I can. Then she opened the window and jumped out, rushing to the place she knew Luffy and the others were hopefully waiting. Usopp kept his eyes on the sea when his spyglass spotted a ship hiding off close to the island. They're here, he whispered, panic searing through his veins. Luffy, I spot a ship, Usopp yelled down to his friends, who were now stretching and yawning. About time, I thought they'd never get here. Luffy yawned, and Usopp scowled a tick on his forehead. We don't want pirates on this island, stupid, he shouted at Luffy, who just gave a small special laugh to his tone. But I'm a pirate, you don't want me here? Luffy asked, which just caused Usopp to sweat drop at Luffy and his logic. That's not what I meant, and you know it, Usopp snapped. Worry was getting the better of him now. Let them come, I'll take them all on myself. Zoro yawned, standing up and watching as the sun was coming up on the horizon now. Luffy, Nami had raced from Kaya's house all the way to the cliff where she knew everyone would be. What are you doing here? Where's Kaya? Usopp asked, even more worried now. She's sleeping. The butler guy did something in the house. Usopp just stared at Nami. Then why are you here? You should be protecting her. He didn't like the idea of Kaya being all alone in the house by herself. She'll be fine as long as we do our job here. Luffy sat up fully now, his eyes on the ship that was sailing ever closer to the island. I'm not going to completely fight. I want to see how strong all of you have gotten since we last met. Luffy knew that should he need to, he was to step in and end the fight altogether, but why get in the way of some needed training? But I don't want to fight all those pirates, Nami freaked out, and Usopp nodded, panicking hard. Usopp, Nami, if you guys can't handle these guys, you'll never survive in the Grand Line. He needed to make it clear to them that the Grand Line and New World were no joke. Here you can make mistakes, but their one mistake could mean your life. Zoro was stunned by Luffy's behavior. Normally Luffy was laid back and laughter, but here he was acting more serious and even finally taking on the role of captain. So all we need to do is kick these guys' asses? He asked Luffy, and the straw-hatted captain nodded cross at Zoro, who was now tying his bandana on his head ready for battle. Should be pretty easy for you. Luffy smirked, looking up at Zoro, a sense of pride going between them, because Luffy knew Zoro would never lose, and Luffy would never let anyone touch his nakama so long as he lived. They're here, Nami whispered as pirates were beginning to jump to the shore from their ship. So it's time to begin, is it? The sun was up and the battle ready to begin. Luffy, you wait here, this will be over quickly. Zoro had touched the hilt of his blade, smirking down the hill at the pirate crew. Right then, we can go get Sanji. None of the people around Luffy knew who this Sanji guy was, but if Luffy had said his name, it meant he was one of them, whether he liked it or not. Walking into the group of pirates, Zoro placed one of his swords into his mouth, clutching the hilt tightly with his teeth. Pulling his other blades out, he glared at the pirates before using all three swords in perfect unison, slicing them before they even made it up the hill. He's so strong, Usopp stuttered out as Luffy plopped himself down at the top of the hill. He's been training just like we have been, Usopp. Zoro's going to need you to watch his back as he deals with all those in front of him, Luffy said, but his eyes never left Zoro as he continued to butcher the weaklings one by one. Right. Putting his goggles over his eyes, Usopp got his slingshot ready to attack should any poor sucker sneak past the swordsman. I'm going to rob that ship, Nami stated, knowing that it was probably filled with treasures. Sure. Luffy was too preoccupied with the small fight happening in front of him to really listen right now. Nami, being a capable thief, knew how to sneak around dangerous situations, even some like this one right now. She carefully snuck by the pirates, catching Zoro's eye for a moment as he blocked another blade before breaking the weak metal under the pressure of his own strong ones. Luffy, I'm getting bored, Zoro complained up at Luffy, who laughed. She. The sun glows in the sky. Captain Kuro isn't a patient man, one of the guys said before looking around and yelling at his beaten men on the ground. Zoro turned back to see them starting to get up and gave them an almost bored expression. So you want to be beaten down again? He scoffed at them as the leader of the group pulled out some circled knives dangling from a strong and swaying them back and forth. What are they doing down there? Luffy stood up to take a better look and the sun caught off the circle blade, catching Luffy's attention. Shiny, he muttered, looking closer, watching the blade swing back and forth as the man said something, and Luffy's mind went blank, rage filling his very being. Luffy? Usopp asked, watching as Luffy began to growl like an animal before charging down the hill, his fists blackened with haki. What the? Zoro asked as Luffy ran right into the pile of growling pirates, knocking them all down and even causing some to lose their anger and run back away from the boy. Where do you think you're going? The hypno guy freaked as a few of his crewmates ran past him in fear. Luffy, growling, ran towards the leader, who cowered in fear that the boy was going to send him flying as well, but Luffy just ran past him and attacked the ship like it was nothing. Why is he attacking the ship? The man yelled, which caused Zoro to have enough. Walking towards his rampaging captain, who was using enough haki to cause a few of the weaker pirates to faint, Zoro was going to stop Luffy from making his job harder. Kill them, Meow Bond brothers, the leader shouted, but Zoro was so angry to even pay any attention to them. Continuing his walk towards Luffy, the brothers moved to attack Zoro from the air. Don't you dare even think about it, Usopp shouted, pulling his slingshot back and shooting the brothers from the sky. I'm the greatest sniper on Luffy's crew, so it's my job to have their backs. Usopp glared at the brothers as they moved away from Zoro and decided to fight against Usopp, who kept stepping back. A sniper doesn't have to fight on the front lines as long as he's got his captain's back. Usopp had never felt this brave before, but now he knew nothing would stop him. Zoro walked right up to Luffy, who was punching into the ship, causing small fist-shaped dents into the wood. Closing his eyes, Zoro put his blades back into their proper sheaths before punching Luffy on the head, not knowing that his fingers up to his knuckles had turned black with haki. That hurt, Luffy shouted, grabbing his head before blinking his eyes, confused as to why he was at the bottom of the hill. You tell us to handle these pirates ourselves, then run down the hill like a maniac, Zoro yelled at Luffy, who was rubbing the back of his head, apologizing. How'd this ship get so many holes in it? Don't these guys know that ships sink that way? Luffy asked, examining the broken parts of the ship he was standing by, only for a few tick marks to appear on Zoro's head. You caused that damage, idiot. I thought I was going to die in there. Nami had come out of the ship just to punch Luffy in the back of the head for his reckless actions. Sorry. Luffy once again apologized. Usopp was feeling quite proud of himself, being able to take on two opponents at once with a relative ease, it seemed. Why don't you let us see your little toy, One of the brothers called to Usopp, reaching for his weapon with one of their clawed hands. No thanks. Moving his hands quickly, Usopp put in a new bit of ammunition to use and try out. Fire Bird Star! Usopp shouted, letting the flaming attack fly, and hit one of the brothers, burning him enough for Usopp to climb into a tree. I'll use the leaves as cover for me, he whispered to himself. Even if they block my vision slightly, Luffy is counting on me to win, so I will. He knew one of the brothers was down, burned, so hopefully he wouldn't be getting back up so quickly. Here goes nothing. Usopp then pulled his slingshot back and shot at the other brother, trying to get him to lose his footing. You can't hide from me, The man yelled at the sniper before realizing Usopp was in a tree, so he climbed it like a cat would to reach the boy, but Usopp could see his plan right before he did it. I'm faster than that guy since I'm smaller. Climbing swiftly through the branches, but still aiming at the guy was hard, but Usopp could do it. He doesn't get it. His stupid cowbell gives away his position every time. Usopp laughed quietly to himself as the man once again was hit by one of Usopp's attacks. For some reason or another, Usopp felt like he could see each movement the man was making before he even made it. I only had one Firebird, but my normal ammo isn't going to cut it. He knew the sniper was only as good as the weapon he used, and being around Luffy long enough taught him that it was okay to need help. Looking around for anyone to help him as he moved through the trees, his eyes spotted Zoro, who was knocking a few more people off their feet while Luffy was protecting Nami and her treasure. Pulling his slingshot back, he aimed it at Zoro's feet to get the swordsman's attention, which worked quite easily. "Zoro, can you deal with these guys?" The swordsman was wondering why Usopp was in a tree in the first place and not on the ground, but decided not to question him as Luffy laughed. "Usopp, you look like a monkey in that tree." He chuckled and pointed. "I work better from afar," he shouted in Luffy's direction, which only caused the captain to laugh a bit more. "I'm not monsters like you guys. I've still got lots more training to do before I can match up to you," Usopp shouted at them as Zoro moved in to finish off the brothers. "What's taking you so long?" Luffy turned his head towards the bottom of the beach where the main jerk had just arrived. "We ran into some difficulties, Captain Kuro," the hypno guy said to him, and the man carefully pushed his glasses up his nose. "I should have known that leaving this task to you was..." He spat out at the man before turning his eyes to Usopp and smirking. "Good job trying to warn the villagers. You made yourself look like a complete fool." Kuro mocked Usopp, who was gritting his teeth at the sight of that man. "What have you done to Kaya?" Usopp spoke through his teeth, glaring at the butler. "Nothing, yet," he smirked, causing Luffy's eyes to narrow. Luffy wasn't one to interfere with another's battle, but this guy was pissing him off and he hadn't done much yet. "So you're the captain?" Luffy asked in an emotionless voice, causing the man to turn his eyes away from Usopp and onto Luffy, who was still sitting in the dirt. "And who might you be, little boy? The affairs of this village and all in it have nothing to do with you," he said back to Luffy, who shook his head at the man as if calling him stupid. "I'm Luffy, and anything my crew decides to protect means I'll protect it as well." Luffy shrugged, causing the butler to laugh at him. "Well, you are doing a poor job of protecting anything just sitting there. Can you really do anything at all?" he asked Luffy, who just smirked, his hat shadowing his eyes slightly now. "I don't need to move right now, there's no need. And can I do anything? Well, I can kick your ass if I need to, but I did think Usopp might want to crack at ya first," he said as Kuro laughed loudly at his threat. "Usopp? You mean that weakling and liar?" Luffy really didn't like him, but honestly he had seen much worse people in the world to be fazed by much. "He may be weak," Luffy started. "Oi," Usopp cut in, "but he's a lot more of a man than you'll ever be, butler guy," Luffy said simply, but the man just turned away from him. "It doesn't matter either way, you'll all be dead shortly. Usopp, and his pirate blood is reason enough for him to never have been born," Kuro said before turning and shouting at his men who were cowering as Zoro finished off the brothers easily. Luffy stood up silently, he was finished playing around now. "Usopp." All but Luffy turned around to see Kaya standing by the trees, her face pale and eyes sad. "Kaya, what are you doing here?" Usopp jumped down from the tree and ran towards her, wanting to push her as far away from this place as possible. "I came to say I'm sorry, I was wrong." Kaya had stumbled upon another of her house servants, Mary, and heard the truth from him what had happened. "Miss Kaya, this place isn't safe for a lady such as you," Kuro said to her, taking back on his butler formalities. "Klahadore, why? If you want my fortune, my mansion, you can have it, but please, don't hurt anyone else," she cried to the man. "Oh, but I have to, Miss Kaya," he said before beginning to talk about why he was running from the sea. "I don't care," Luffy said, crossing his arms. Zoro gave Luffy a look, wondering what he was up to. "What did you say to me, brat?" Kuro snarled, so Luffy repeated himself. "I don't care. I don't care about your backstory, and why you hate the sea. I don't care about what you want with that girl's life. I really don't care about all that at all. What I do care about is that you mocked and harmed my friends, and for that I'm going to kick your ass," Luffy said before turning to look at Zoro, who was still looking at Luffy, waiting for orders. All Luffy did was nod in Usopp's direction, and Zoro grinned. "I got it, Captain," he said before turning and moving to guard the girl. "Usopp, we're to protect this lady here," he said, giving Usopp Luffy's orders. "But shouldn't we be fighting Kuro?" Usopp was confused. Luffy hadn't spoken any words to the swordsman at all. "No need, this battle will be over soon." Zoro closed his eyes, and could feel the anger coming off of Luffy. That man was about to get what was coming to him. "So you wish to fight me, little boy?" Kuro mocked before beginning to sway back and forth weirdly. "Fine, I'll just have to kill you myself then." He then moved really quickly, slicing everyone and everything in his path. Luffy was watching the butler guy, and the way he harmed the people who followed him pissed him off more. Winding back his fist, he aimed it towards the butler, hitting him easily. "But how?" Kuro exclaimed, touching his face where Luffy had hit him. "I'm not like you," Luffy whispered angrily. "That's right, you're weak compared to me. You could never be half the man I am," Kuro said before stepping back into his attack, causing his men to scream in terror at the thought of being killed by their captain. "All that running around is really annoying," Luffy shouted before grabbing the guy by his shirt, holding him still long enough for Luffy to get a good punch into the man's face. "But that's impossible," he cried out. "I'm Captain Kuro, the man of 1,000 plans," he declared. "I will not be defeated by a no-name pirate on these seas." He pointed at Luffy once he had got his footing back. "I'm not some no-name pirate. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, the man who will become the king of the pirates," he shouted, glaring at the butler. "No one's ever been able to even touch Captain Kuro before. How could this even be happening?" the Hypno guy cried out in fear, and Zoro smirked down at Luffy. "What good is speed when your opponent can see your every move?" Zoro said softly, knowing that Luffy's observation skills were too good to even let him get a scratch from that guy. "But no one is faster than our captain," one person shouted out before being taunted by said captain. "You all had pretty bad luck, running into Luffy." Zoro couldn't stop the excited feeling in his chest, knowing Luffy was stronger than most people. "That's right, Luffy isn't just anyone. He's the son of Whitebeard." Usopp smiled, his slingshot still pointed at anyone who dared move near Kaya, especially the Hypno guy. "A Whitebeard pirate? Don't make me laugh. People like them never come to the East Blue," Kuro said, not believing that Luffy was really anything other than a new rookie on the seas. "You're right, I'm not a Whitebeard pirate. I'm my own captain now and don't need my pops to take care of me anymore," Luffy said to Kuro, who stopped smiling. "A Whitebeard pirate? But that's impossible." Nami whispered, her eyes wide, really looking at Luffy, now trying to see the title beyond the carefree boy in front of her. "Like I said, Pops is Pops, and I mean we're totally different crews now." Luffy was starting to get annoyed, knowing that this reaction might happen a lot by people. "We can't touch him. If we do, that old man will kill us all," a few weaklings called out to Kuro, who turned towards them and snarled. "Weak people like all of you should just die then if you aren't here to fight." Kuro then went back into his attack, moving quickly, slicing many of his nakama along the way. "You know, being from a large family, I hate people like you. People who misuse their crew, their nakama. Their own family don't deserve to be commanded like dogs." Luffy growled, stretching his arm out and grabbing Kuro by the leg, dragging him back towards Luffy around the fallen and dead pirates. "You think you can defeat me, boy?" Kuro shouted as Luffy then stretched his neck far back while holding Kuro by the shoulders. "Of course." Luffy then coated his forehead with haki before shouting his attack. "Gomu Gomu no, Bell." Letting his neck snap back forward, he hit Kuro in the head. A loud ding could be heard from the move, but Kuro fell to the ground completely unconscious, blood trickling down his forehead by the force of Luffy's head-on attack. Feeling slightly dizzy by the action, he tried to regain himself before pulling Kuro up by the shirt and throwing him to his old crew. "Take this man back with you, back to the sea he so hates, and never return to this island." Luffy looked up at them, his eyes dark and angry as the men nodded, sweating bullets before rushing back to their broken ship and setting sail away from the island. The dizziness setting in fully now, Luffy stumbled upon his feet as Nami caught him before he fell. "Luffy, why did you get so upset at them?" She needed to know, especially if Luffy had always been a pirate. Wrong. Nakama families shouldn't be treated like that ever. She helped steady him before smiling softly but sadly. "Not every pirate thinks like you do." She truly believed in Luffy now, even if what Usopp said was true about his family. Luffy was still Luffy. "I'm hungry," Luffy whined, closing his eyes before falling on his back in the sand. "We did it!" Usopp cried out happily before giving Kaya a hug in excitement. Kaya was laughing softly at Usopp as he blushed embarrassedly after letting her go. "Thank you, all of you, for saving me, and this village," she said, walking towards Luffy, and bowing deeply to him, but he just laughed it off. "It was Usopp, and his courage that made us want to help out," Luffy said truthfully. "And I got a lot of treasure out of it." Nami winked to Kaya, who smiled at her friend. "But we still don't have a ship, guys," Zoro reminded them, and Nami sighed, remembering their small problem. "You need a ship?" she asked, confused. "Yeah, that's what we came to ask you for last time," Luffy said, leaning on his elbows in the sand looking up at the girl. "I'm not sure what I can do, but please let me try," she smiled to Luffy, who cheered at her, happy and tired, but more importantly he was hungry. "Usopp, food, now," Luffy whined once again before falling back to the beach sand, and holding his stomach, his tongue falling from his mouth to emphasize just how hungry he was. "Alright, let's go eat." The small band of pirates were tired and hungry, especially Luffy, but it finally seemed things were looking up for them. "Whoa, this is so cool," Luffy shouted, looking at the shiny brand new ship before them. "Wow, that's a caravel class," Nami said, happy to see such a beautiful ship. "Mary here designed it," Kaya said happily, her hands folded in front of her. "It's an older model, but still a dream ship. I like to call the Going Merry," he said happily to talk about it. Usopp was standing beside Luffy, his backpack filled with everything he would need for the journey out at sea. "It's going to be lonesome without your stories, Usopp," Kaya said as Luffy and the others jumped aboard to check out the new ship, Mary following behind to talk about each place. "The next time we meet I'll have real stories to tell you, so don't stay sick, alright?" he asked her, and she nodded. "I as well will be different the next time we meet." She was planning to start studying to become a doctor. "Oi Usopp, hurry up," Luffy yelled, leaning over the railing to yell at his sniper. "Impatient as ever, I guess I'll see you around." Usopp waved before jumping to the ship as well. "Goodbye everyone," Kaya and Mary called, waving as the Mary sailed away from the island. Nami watched as Luffy finished waving goodbye before approaching Luffy. "Is what Usopp said true? Are you really a white-beard pirate?" Nami wasn't stupid, she knew of the big names in the pirating world. "I grew up with Pops and the others, so I guess I was part of that crew, but I'm not now. They're still my family, and I love them a lot, but I want to be strong on my own." He shrugged, not understanding why it was such a big deal to everyone. "Why didn't you tell me this when we met?" She knew fully if he had she would never have joined him, or maybe she would have, but it doesn't really matter anymore. Because it's not a big deal. Pops and the others won't get in our way of having an adventure. Luffy pouted, annoyed that his Pop's name was already starting to stick to him. "Nami, I'm me, and Pops is Pops, just like I said to that butler jerk, so let's have fun, alright?" Luffy gave Nami one of his trademark grins before running off to find Usopp to get the flag design. Nami watched him leave before sighing and putting her hand over her covered tattoo. "Would you like these guys, Belmere?" Meanwhile, a flirty cook was serving a sweet treat to a beautiful lady at a restaurant not far off. Looking at the waves through one of the windows in the dining room, he couldn't help feel like something was about to happen. "Sanji, stop dawdling around and serve those people their drinks already," the head chef shouted at the teenager, who glared at him before passing out the waters to the table of only men, ignoring them as he walked back away. "That boy should be back soon," Zeph said to Sanji, who looked confused for a moment before the memory of a loud straw-hatted kid came to mind. "Better let the cooks know he'll be back so they can prepare for his stomach." Sanji sighed, rubbing his head, but really he was excited to see the boy again. Looking back out the window, that strange feeling was returning once more. Taking a deep inhale of his cigarette and blowing out the smoke, he smiled. "What trouble are you bringing with you this time, Luffy?" "Usopp," Luffy called from the figurehead where he had decided to make this his special spot. "You don't need to scream, Luffy, seriously," Usopp scolded his captain and friend, who just laughed happily. "I drew our pirate flag, want to see it?" he asked excitedly, pulling his artwork up and showing his small crew what he had decided would represent their pirate crew. Is it an abstract art maybe?" Nami asked, tilting her head and squinting her eyes, trying to decide if she liked it or not. "Well, a pirate crew's mark is supposed to strike fear into people's hearts, and that does a pretty good job." Zoro was just a step away from approving the flag until Usopp stepped in to save the day and his crew's reputation. "Nope, sorry Luffy, but really you should have asked a real professional artist to make the flag." Usopp sighed before taking new fresh black cloth that Kaya had supplied onto the ship for them and recreating a new flag with a mixture of his sniper qualities and Luffy's straw hat. Usopp, wanting to be a little sneaky, he put a touch of himself in. "See, doesn't this look better?" he asked, knowing full well Luffy was about to deny it. "Not at all, stop joking around," Luffy scowled and Usopp chuckled, happy to have pulled a prank on his captain. Nami couldn't stop herself from laughing at the flag that had been created, which in turn caused the entire of them to laugh along with her. "Make us the proper one now," Luffy said, wiping a few stray tears away from his eyes, and grinning as Usopp nodded, a serious look on his face, but still he smiled. Once the new and proper flag was created, Usopp was ordered to paint the sails with the same mark while Nami and Luffy helped prepare the drinks for a party to celebrate that afternoon. Luffy was curious, and never being one to let things go, couldn't stop wondering when Nami was going to do something he wouldn't like. He didn't want to ask her what was wrong since he did feel it wasn't much his business, but at the same time as one of his nakama it was now becoming his business. The mental dilemma continued on in his head on whether he should ask her about what was wrong or not before she turned to look at him, pulling a few glasses down from the cupboard. "Nay Luffy, do you have a mother?" Nami asked him, leaning against the counter and looking at him carefully. Well kinda," he said, knowing Marco wasn't probably the mother she was thinking of. "What do you mean by that?" "My mother I guess is Marco. He raised me from birth, and has always been there for me no matter what, so I guess he's my mother, and I do call him Ma." Luffy chuckled at the end, really thinking about his ma. "Wouldn't that make him your father then?" hearing that his ma was actually a man. "Nope, Pops is my father." He said that simply because that was the truth. "So you never met your birth mother?" Luffy was confused on why this was a big deal. The people that raised him loved him a lot, so did it matter whose blood was really in his veins? "Nope, but I don't really care about that. All I know is that my birth dad gave me to Pops and Marco, and they have loved me like their son my entire life. Why should I be interested in the people who didn't want me?" He didn't know for certain if his birth parents did or didn't want him. All he cared about was that he was raised by his family, and nothing could ever change that. "Nami, family is family, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done," Luffy said to her, pouring some juice into the glasses. He and Nami walked out the door with glasses of juice in their hands. "If you need our help, all you need to do is ask." Leaving it at that for Nami to think about, Luffy left the galley. Walking towards Zoro, Luffy passed him his drink only for the man to frown at it. "Juice?" he asked Luffy, staring down at the liquid. "I don't like alcohol much." He shrugged, leaving Zoro with the drink as Usopp climbed down from the sails, panting and covered in paint. "There," Usopp said proudly as Nami gave him a drink and smiled. "Thanks for your hard work," she greeted him, and he smiled sheepishly at her gratefully. "It was nothing for an experienced painter like myself. I've been doing this for nearly 50 years, you know," he said, sitting on the deck taking the drink and cooling off. 50 years, really?" Nami asked in sarcasm, catching his lie easily. "How many grandchildren do you have, Usopp?" Zoro snickered at the sniper, who was beginning to blush. "Wow, you must be as old as my pops." Luffy joined in, causing the teenager to shake his head and drink his juice back quickly, avoiding the laughter coming from his joking crewmates. "To the going merry," Luffy shouted, raising his glass to his new ship along with everyone else. The day passed by smoothly, filled with laughter and exploration of their new home, when Usopp heard Luffy making loud noises on deck, waking him from his nap. "What are you doing, Luffy?" He had fallen asleep after the party from exhaustion due to painting the sails in the hot afternoon sun. "Trying out the cannon." His siblings never let him near anything that could earn the first commander's wrath, so using the cannons back home was something he never got to do. "Let an old pro show you how it's done," Usopp joked, pushing Luffy aside, stuffing the cannon with the proper things and lighting it, allowing it to go off and hit a giant rock far off into the distance. "Amazing! You hit it!" Luffy yelled, jumping up and down excitedly. I did. Of course I did. I'm the great and amazing Usopp-sama." Usopp threw back his shoulders, making himself stand taller in pride. Before the two could celebrate properly, a small boat was being rowed towards them at top speed. "Come out, pirates!" a voice shouted as a man jumped aboard the ship and sliced the railing up. "Stop hurting our ship!" Luffy screamed at him, but the man was too angry to listen. "I've killed hundreds of pirates like you all, so how dare you kill my friend?" he cried out and sliced another railing up, causing Luffy to have enough and punch the guy down to stop him. "I said stop hurting our new ship, we don't know anything about your friend," Luffy shouted at the man, loudly waking Zoro up from one of his many naps. "What's going on now, Luffy?" Zoro yawned, walking towards the deck, his eyes opened wide when he saw who was on the floor. "Johnny, is that you?" Zoro asked, taking a good look at the man who glared at the pirates. "Who dares speak my name so casually?" he growled out, but smiled once he realized who it was that was talking to him. "Big brother Zoro," he shouted in happiness, which brought confusion to Luffy on who this guy was. "So it is you? Where's Yosaku? Don't you guys travel together?" Zoro looked around for the other man he was friends with but didn't see him, which was weird. "Yosaku, he's sick. He was fine until a few days ago and now he's dying, big bro," Johnny cried out, and Zoro couldn't help but feel bad for his friends. "You know these guys, Zoro?" Luffy asked, still confused. "Yeah, I traveled with them for a while when I was looking for you," Zoro said, offhandedly going and checking on Yosaku to see how the guy was with his own eyes. "You were the guy big bro was looking for?" Johnny asked Luffy, looking up at the Straw Hat Captain. "Well, he was supposed to be waiting for me, but yeah, I guess I am." Luffy shrugged, following Zoro and looking at the sick friend. "Maybe if you feed him some meat he might get better," Luffy suggested, only for Usopp to slap him over the head. "That doesn't work on people, Luffy," he shouted. "We were resting on that rock island over there when a cannon was shot at us," Johnny said, hiding his eyes with his sleeve as he cried. "Ah, we're so sorry," Luffy and Usopp said at the same time, bowing their heads in shame, causing Johnny to shout at them some more. Nami rolled her eyes at the scene before walking towards them, her hand on her hip to take a good look at the guy. "From the looks of it, he has scurvy. Luffy, Usopp, there are some lemons in the storage room, right? Go grab some for me," she commanded, and the moving following her order. Once they returned with piles of fresh lemons in their hands, Nami rolled her eyes, taking only one of them, cutting it in half and squeezing the juice into the man's mouth. Suddenly the man jumped back to life like nothing had happened. "Yosaku, you're alive," Johnny yelled, and the two hugged, laughing and even crying. "You're lucky you're alive. You had scurvy, and by the looks of things you only had a few days left at most," she scolded the man, who then grabbed hold of her hand and thanked her profusely. "Wow, Nami, you're like a doctor," Luffy said in awe, looking at his navigator. "Every person who sails these seas should know about this, Luffy. It can happen to you if you don't come prepared," she scolded, but Zoro nodded to her, grateful that she was able to help save his friend. "You're right. What we need is a sea chef then to help balance our food properly so we don't all get sick," Usopp said in thought. "Well, if you guys are looking for a chef, we know a place," Johnny said to the crew, but Luffy brushed it off. "Nah, we got a chef already," he said, only for Nami to smack him behind the head. "Where were you guys thinking about?" she asked them, and Johnny smiled. "The Bharati. It's got the best chefs around." Luffy, hearing those words, grinned like an idiot. "It does, doesn't it? Sanji will be waiting for us there," Luffy said to them, which brought about a bit of confusion. "Sanji?" Zoro asked, but Luffy turned to Nami. "Remember the place you brought me to when I went missing a few years ago?" he asked her, causing her to blink in confusion, thinking back that far. "You mean that giant floating fish place?" she said, placing a hand under her chin, thinking carefully. "Yeah, that place. We have a chef waiting for us there, but he doesn't know it yet," Luffy thought out loud. "That's the Bharati. If you're already heading in that direction, please allow us to take you there," they said, jumping up, happy to be useful, only for Yosaku to fall back down, tired and sick. "Yosaku!" Johnny shouted, only for Nami to scold them for thinking he would be healed right away. "So we're finally coming for you, Sanji." Luffy grinned. Zoro couldn't stop the feeling of annoyance at the thought of this new crewmate, even if he hadn't met him yet. They sailed for a long while, allowing Zoro and his friends to catch up on the stuff that had happened to them since they had been split. "So that's the captain you were looking for, Zoro bro?" Johnny asked as his friend Yosaku got some needed sleep. "Yeah, he's a real pain in the ass, but he's the man I chose to follow," Zoro said fondly as Luffy lay on his back on top of the figurehead, looking at the clouds going by. "He's rather strange." Johnny wasn't as strong as Zoro, but even he could feel that the boy with the straw hat was stronger than he appeared to be. Luffy doesn't need to act strong to be strong. Zoro couldn't believe those words had come from him, but being with Luffy, he learned some new things. While he himself gave the appearance of strength and caution, Luffy always seemed to have that air of childishness, appearing like a kid in way over his head. As great as it was to have people fear him at sight, Luffy's childishness worked in his favor most times. Most people didn't take Luffy seriously until it was too late, but for him they took him seriously each and every time. If you will follow him, then he must be a good guy. Johnny smiled as Luffy began to cry out for food. I'll make you something, for a price of course. Nami smiled, and Zoro closed his eyes in annoyance. With rates like yours we'll starve, which? Zoro growled at her and she just laughed at him. Why not make it yourself then, Captain? She asked Luffy, who scowled at the water. Last time I tried to help in the kitchen I burnt down the baker's table. My brother Thatch refused to let me back in there for a month after that, and even then I had to beg Marco to talk him into forgiving me. Zoro couldn't stop the laugh at a clumsy Luffy burning things down around him. Figures. Usopp said, shaking his head as Luffy pouted at their teasing. How much longer until we get there? He whined some more as Yosaku woke up and came to join the crew on deck. Should be shortly, see over there. Johnny pointed in the distance where a large ship was floating. That's the place, he said with a smile. Yosh. Luffy jumped in excitement at the idea of getting some of Sanji's amazing food once again. Sailing closer to the floating restaurant, excitement was in the air at getting a good meal, and for Luffy, seeing his good friend. All excitement drained when a marine vessel showed up in front of them, blocking their path. Pirates? A man with pink hair asked, looking down at the annoyed and even scared faces on the Going Merry. Oi, can you move your ship? It's in the way. Luffy called at the man, who laughed. A pirate telling me, a marine lieutenant, Iron Fist full body, what to do? I've never seen your mark before, pirate. He scoffed, looking down his nose at Luffy. Yeah, we just made it today. Luffy said simply to the man, who turned to look at Johnny and Yosaku, who were cowering on deck. So it seems you finally caught yourselves some actual pirates, he said to them, and they growled at the marine. Orders, sir? A grunt asked, and the man smirked. Sink it. He then turned away from them, moving towards his date, leaving the pirates to their fate as a cannon was shot at the Merry. Taking action, Luffy blew himself up and bounced the cannonball away from the ship. Unfortunately, Luffy's foot got caught on the railing of the Merry, and he stumbled, shooting the cannon into the restaurant. We're in big trouble now, Nami said, and Luffy fell back on the deck, closing his eyes. Sanji's gonna kill me. He sighed. Accepting his fate, Luffy and the crew all moved into the restaurant to talk. I gotta go find that old man and apologize, Luffy said to his crew, who nodded, knowing Luffy's nature of honesty. Smiling softly at the memories of this place, Luffy walked up the stairs looking for Zeph and hopefully the stray shot. So it was you, Brad. What are you doing shooting at us? Zeph the owner looked down at Luffy, who was still climbing the stairs. It was an accident. He smiled and Zeph shook his head. That accident of yours will cost you. Zeph moved to let Luffy past him, and they walked towards an old room Luffy had stayed in once before. I'm kinda poor right now, can I pay ya back later? Luffy asked Zeph, who crossed his arms and pointed to the hole in his roof. Why don't you work the payment off then? Zeph asked him with a smirk, and Luffy scowled. No way. I'm not asking for much time, just a year, Zeph said, and Luffy glared. If this is Ma's way of keeping an eye on me by making me stay in one spot, I'll be mad, Luffy said slowly to the old chef, who didn't say anything, just smiled. I'll be sending the bill to your pops, he challenged, knowing that Luffy didn't want his family's help. Tell Pops I say hi. Luffy grinned. It was quiet for a second before they both burst out in laughter. I want you to do that yourself, Brat. Zeph then walked to a desk, opened it up, and pulled out a transponder snail. You should have one of these. He hadn't brought one with him when he left, since he wanted to have his own adventures. You're lucky to have a family that cares, kid. Don't worry them too much. Zeph left the room with Luffy sitting there staring at the phone. He did miss his family really, but he wanted to talk to them when he was back in home waters. Looks like that old man's not leaving me any choice, is he? Luffy sighed, picking up the receiver and smiling softly to himself. Hello? The smooth voice of Thatch made him smile wider. Is that all you have to say after so long? Luffy asked, his voice a bit shaky, but it was from excitement more than emotion. There was a pause on the other end as the snail's eyes widened at recognizing Luffy's voice. "Lou?" Thatch asked just to be sure, and Luffy gave his signature laugh. She, where's Ma? Who laughed. "What, am I not good enough, brat?" Thatch joked, and Luffy gave a feigned pout. "Of course you are, I just need to talk to him, that's all." There was a shuffling around on the other end, so Luffy knew Thatch was rushing to find Marco, and anyone else who wanted to talk to him. "You didn't bring a snail with you, Yui," were Marco's first words, and he sounded slightly offended. "I forgot," Luffy said before laughing at the annoyed Marco. "Where are you, and how did you come by one of these?" Thatch asked, pushing Marco aside. "I'm at the Bharati, I may have blown a hole through their roof," Luffy giggled, and Marco sighed. "So Zeph gave you this, did he, Yui?" Marco asked, and Luffy looked confused. "Didn't you give it to him to give to me?" Luffy thought for sure this was Marco's idea to keep an eye on him. "Have you forgotten that there is one other person who might be very protective of you, Lou?" A voice that Luffy had missed the most asked him through the phone, and he couldn't help but grin a toothy smile. "Ace," Ace chuckled, pushing both Thatch and Marco away from the phone. "I think I left that there when we visited a few years ago," Ace admitted to Luffy, who nodded. "So Marco wasn't trying to keep tabs on me," he said, and Ace laughed. "Nope, this time it was me." "What kind of trouble are you in this time?" he asked Luffy, who chuckled. "I'm not in trouble," he wasn't, at least not now anyway. "Yet brat, you're not in trouble yet," someone had called in the background. "Have you found those nakama of yours yet?" Ace asked him, and Luffy nodded. "I have Zoro, Nami, and Usopp right now. We're just about to find Sanji, but something feels weird." He looked out the window, a weird feeling in his gut. "What kind of weird, Yui?" Marco asked him. "I think I'm going to be fighting someone soon, but I could be wrong." Luffy knew someone with a lot of power was coming their way. The feeling it was giving him was almost familiar. "Nay Pops, you didn't send anyone out to visit me in surprise, right?" Luffy asked, knowing they were by his pop's chair. "No my son, we know your wishes to do this alone." Luffy nodded, knowing Pops held things like freedom as highly as Luffy did. "Someone familiar is coming my way, but I don't know who." Luffy was good at pinpointing the way he felt around people. Being raised in the New World taught him that anyone could be considered an enemy if they weren't part of your family. By judging his feelings on people, Luffy had kept himself relatively safe growing up. "Keep yourself safe, Lou," Ace warned, and Marco nodded. "If you need us, we will be there, Yui." And he would be. If Luffy so much as asked, he would come in a heartbeat. Probably with Ace and half the crew behind him, make that the entirety of the crew. This is the East Blue, it's not that exciting really. He felt he might need to remind them where he was before an Emperor's crew showed up there, scaring every marine and village alike. "Just remember we have your back, that's all, kid," Thatch said to Luffy, who nodded before a knock could be heard on the door. "Luffy Yoi?" Marco asked, realizing that they were losing the kid's attention. Sanji opened the door to see Luffy sitting by the window, the transponder snail awake. "I can come back later," he said, and Luffy shook his head. "I'm heading out, I'll call you guys when something interesting happens," Luffy said to his family. "Sanji?" Ace asked, and the blonde made his way over to the phone. "I recognize your shitty voice," but Sanji was smiling down at it. "Asshole, take care of my brother," Ace said, but he too was smiling. "Bye guys," Luffy called before hanging up the phone and turning towards Sanji. "What's up?" Sanji lit his smoke before he sighed. "You really bring trouble everywhere you go, don't you?" Looking at the hole in the ceiling, Luffy smiled. "It was an accident, I swear," he said, and Sanji shook his head. "Come help me serve these shitty customers, and I'll forgive you for the accident," he said, once again looking up at the hole, shaking his head. "Fine, but only if you feed me afterwards." Luffy jumped off the windowsill and followed Sanji to the dining hall. "Nay Sanji." Luffy stopped and looked at his friend just before he entered the hall. Join my crew," Luffy said with a big toothy grin, causing Sanji to make a face before laughing. "Don't joke, shithead," he said as Luffy just laughed, since Sanji didn't quite say no, not like he'd ever accept a no from him. She. He laughed, walking past his friend. "We have work to do, so don't mess up." Sanji grabbed an apron from one of the staff areas and threw it towards Luffy. "Looking good, Luffy," Nami yelled, and waved towards their captain, who scowled once he saw they were eating something. "Mr. Waiter, I'd like to order some more drinks if you don't mind," Zoro said, laughing silently at Luffy, who had his finger up his nose then flicking his snot into Zoro's drink when the man wasn't looking. "This water is boring, I'd like some rum," Zoro said, picking up his contaminated drink as everyone snickered around the table. Zoro, not being weak, knew Luffy had done something to his drink, so smiling he tipped the cup to his lips before grabbing Luffy's neck and forcing him to drink the bad water. "Try something like that again and I'll cut you up," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only humor. "Is that any way to talk with beautiful ladies that close by? Especially someone as extravagant as you, mademoiselle?" Sanji asked Nami, bowing to his knee and taking her hand before glaring at Zoro, who just raised a brow and grunted at the newcomer. "What was that?" Zoro asked as Luffy grabbed Sanji, throwing an arm around his shoulder. "This guy's going to be our cook," Luffy said to the crew, and Sanji pushed him off, scowling at him. "I agreed to nothing, Luffy. Now are you going to help or not?" Zoro glared at the blonde man, hoping Luffy was just kidding about having him join. "MN, coming," he called to Sanji, waving at his friends, who found it rather funny and refreshing to see Luffy helping out and acting sort of normal. Helping with the dinner service, Zeph rewarded his crew by letting them stay the night in some of the upstairs rooms. "Even though you blew a hole through my roof, which I shall send the bill to your family for, Brad, and broke many of my dishes, good work, kid," Zeph said, causing Luffy to smile. "Thanks for the food," Luffy replied, stuffing his face with meat. "It's been such a long time since you've been back. I'm surprised those shitty brothers of yours didn't follow you," Sanji said, smiling while thinking of Ace and Sabo. "Sabo's on his own adventure with my birth father, and Ace probably wanted to follow me." Luffy knew that if given the chance, Marco and Ace would be stalking him across the world, and only didn't because Pops wouldn't let them. Marco would obey instantly, mostly because he was a grown man who knew boundaries, but Ace, who knows? So Sabo went off on his own. Sanji remembered how protective that brother was, so for him to be away from Luffy and Ace was surprising to him. "Sabo has his own adventures just like Ace, and I do. When we meet again we'll tell each other all about them." Luffy couldn't wait until he met his brother again, but he was somewhat patient. "I'm shutting the kitchen down, so let's head to bed." Sanji turned the lights off and headed towards the stairs. "Zoro is already up there with Usopp, so I'll be up in a moment. I have something I need to do first," Luffy said with a grin. "If you say so, just don't fall in the water, please," Sanji sighed before waving at Luffy and continuing up the stairs. "The stars are a little different here than they are back home," Luffy said, walking on the deck of the Mary, startling Nami. "Are you good at reading them?" she asked him, and he laughed loudly. "Nope, I just like to look at them. Even when the sun goes down and darkness fills the sky, there is always a little light because of the stars," he said, and Nami giggled. "I didn't know you were such a philosopher," she said to Hik, not recognizing the word, so he chose to ignore it. "You can't stay long, huh?" he asked her, causing her to turn her head towards him quickly, her eyes wide. "What do you?" she began, but Luffy shook his head. "Nothing, I don't know anything, and I don't really care about anything. Your past is yours, but you're my friend, and I just want to help where I can. I'd help any of my nakama no matter what, because that's what families do for each other," he said to her, putting his hands behind his head, staring up at the stars. The straw hat fluttered slightly in the cool ocean wind as Nami looked away, shadows over her eyes. "It's a long story," she sighed, and Luffy nodded. "I don't want to hear it then." Long stories weren't his thing. He's not a kid anymore, and Pops has told him enough stories for quite a while. "My village needs me." She pretty much made her long story short that way, causing him to nod. "What do you want me to do?" He needed her to ask him for help, otherwise he could do nothing. "You're from the Grand Line, right?" she asked him, and he nodded again. "Are you really one of Whitebeard's sons?" She knew that this question bothered him because names were not something he cared much for. "Luffy cared about you by the actions you did, not by the title you carried." "Yes, I am." His voice was strained, but she needed to know this. "Prove it." If he truly was a Whitebeard pirate, maybe, just maybe, he could stand up against Arlong. Looking at her through the shadows of night, he lifted up his shirt, showing his back to her and the tattoo that was on it. "That is Pop's mark and my ma's feather." That was proof enough for her to nod silently as he pulled his shirt down. "Nami, what do you want me to do?" he asked her once again, this time fully turned towards her. Nami placed her hand on her shoulder over the tattoo that had haunted her for most of her life. "I want you to save me." Luffy had got the confirmation he needed from Nami, and so he would do as she asked. "Do you want to hear the whole story?" She sighed, but Luffy pushed himself away from the railing, a small smile on his face. "Nope, I said I wasn't interested and I meant it. Just show me where to go and I'll fight whatever or whoever is hurting you." He laughed to himself and Nami smiled at him, shaking her head. "I need to get back to my village as soon as possible." She knew there wasn't much time left. "Tomorrow take the Mary, we'll meet you there." Luffy knew that Zoro's friends had a small ship so they could get him there just as fast. "But you don't know where to go, idiot." Turning away from the water, Nami pulled out a rolled-up wanted poster and showed it to Luffy. "This is Arlong, those friends of Zoro's, Johnny and Yosaku. They're bounty hunters, they should know where he is." Nami knew Luffy would find his way to her village regardless, but giving him a hint to find it would be better than him and Zoro going in circles while she wasn't there. "Right, I'll give this to them." He rolled it back up and stuffed it into his pocket. "Tomorrow is going to be an interesting day," Luffy said softly, jumping from Mary onto the deck of the Baratie. "Interesting, that's a great way of putting it." She sighed, joining him as both went their separate ways into their own rooms. "What were you doing out there all alone with the beautiful Nami Swan?" Sanji growled once Luffy was in his room. "Talking. Simple, because that was all he was doing." "Luffy." Sanji said his friend name through gritted teeth as Luffy ignored him, heading to the same place he had slept years ago. "I'm tired, can we do this tomorrow?" He whined, and Sanji closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "Fine, but you're getting up early with me, shithead." He would interrogate the kid tomorrow morning while making breakfast. Sanji, like many who had met the boy, knew full well that Luffy could be bribed with food. Fine. As soon as Luffy's head hit his pillow, he was out like a light. "Haven't changed a bit, have you, shithead?" Sanji smiled, getting into his own bed, but it was relieving to know that Luffy, even after all these years, was still the same meat-loving kid he had met. "Goodnight," he whispered before rolling over, getting no answer, but snores in return. When morning came, Luffy didn't complain getting up to watch Sanji cook breakfast for the restaurant. "When can I eat?" he mumbled to himself, rubbing his eyes and yawning. "When prep's finished, the restaurant comes first, then we can eat," Sanji said, peeling more potatoes swiftly. But I'm hungry now." He whined some more, hoping Sanji would give in to him and feed the loud whiner. "Here, eat this." Zeph had entered the kitchen and threw an apple Luffy's way. "That won't fill me up at all," Luffy said, taking a bite, and Zeph laughed to himself. "I don't expect it to. I just want you to stop whining. I've got enough to deal with this kid around," Zeph said, looking towards Sanji, who had a tick appear on his head. "Shut it, you shitty old man," Sanji grumbled out, but his words were almost spoken out of habit. The exchange between Sanji and Zeph reminded Luffy so much of home he couldn't help but smile at them. "What's with that look, brat?" Zeph asked Luffy, who stood up, then stole half the plate of bacon before grinning back at them. "You guys just remind me of home." Swallowing all the pieces quickly before Sanji and the other chefs yelled at him, Luffy took off to find Zoro and the others. "Damn brag, giving us more work to do." Zeph smiled and Sanji sighed, placing more strips of bacon back on the pan. "Nothing new, he's still the same shitty bastard he was last time we saw him." Breakfast had rolled around, and the place was filled. "Hey Luffy, why is your chef friend helping out in the front if he's a cook?" Usopp asked, pointing towards Sanji, who was bringing people food and drinks. From what I remember, this place can get a bit rowdy, so a lot of the waiters quit," Luffy said, remembering how a few waiters walked out when he came a few years ago. "So we get dinner and a show here. Not a bad deal." Zoro grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Well, it's no wonder. This place is really close to the Grand Line. People probably stop here before going over to that sea," Nami said, and Luffy nodded his head but wasn't really listening. "Waiter," a man called, and Sanji turned and, looking in direction, a brow raised at him. Luffy thought he recognized the man calling Sanji, but then again he wasn't sure either. Sighing, Sanji walked over to the man who was holding his wine up and smelling it with a look of glee on his face. "Yes?" Sanji asked. This guy wasn't a lady, so he saw no need to be formal with him. The man went on to describe the wine Sanji had given him only a few moments earlier, asking if it was a famous brand, and Sanji almost rolled his eyes. "No, you're not even close. Eat up this dish, it's best when it's hot," Sanji said, forcing a spoon into the man's hand as the restaurant began laughing at the man who had just been humiliated. What were you saying about dinner and a show? Nami snickered. Even Zoro couldn't fight off a small smile at the Marine's poor fortune. Sanji began to walk away before stopping, and turning back at the man glaring slightly. Sir, also my name is Sanji, I'm the sous chef. All the waiters ran off, and our volunteer is sitting on his ass eating more of our food. Sanji felt ticks appearing on his head as Luffy was stuffing his face some more. Even though Luffy was stuffing his face with the breakfast Zoro and the others had on their table, he couldn't stop his eyes from watching what the weird man was going to do next. He could see that the guy was angry after being humiliated, but would he make a bigger fool of himself over one person's words? Luffy then let his eyes drift over to Sanji, curious as to what he might do if this guy flew off the handle. Hey waiter! The man shouted again, and Sanji gritted his teeth at being shouted at by some guy. What now? He asked. His tone clearly said he was annoyed. How can you expect me to eat this garbage? There's a bug in my soup. He shouted, showing Sanji the soup that did in fact hold a bug floating in it. Sanji sighed, shaking his head, and removing the bug before turning to the lady beside him. I'm so sorry my lady, to have a date like him must truly be embarrassing, Sanji said sadly, placing his hand on hers, causing her to giggle, and others to snicker at the scene. The man stood up, then smashed the table in, breaking all of the dishes and destroying the food that was in them. Everyone could feel the air in the room change as Sanji kneeled down to pick up a piece of glass, staring at it and the mess on the floor. If you had just picked out the bug, it would have still be good. I spent 3 whole days and nights working on this soup with care, and now because of you shithead it's been wasted. Sanji's voice took on a deadly coolness that threatened any around him. Luffy didn't smile at the scene, but took on his poker face, and stopped eating altogether. Luffy had learned from a very early age that wasting food was a sin on any ship. Food was hard to come by when you're sailing away from islands, and hunger doesn't care how many people need to eat. What this man has done would have earned him a beating, followed closely by a salt water bath had Thatch been here to see this. The man, not understanding the danger he was in, decided to mock Sanji on his customer service by stepping on his hand and squishing his foot to add more pressure. He mocked Sanji some more, but the blonde didn't even flinch because he was so mad. Only when the beautiful lady tried to interfere did Sanji look up. The man had thrown the lady back away from him, knocking her over, and that was the last straw for him. Can money fill your stomach? Sanji asked in a deadly whisper, and the man just stared confused. Can money fill your stomach? Sanji repeated, but his calmness was fading as shadows took over his face, and before's up and moving. Sanji dropped to his hands, and used his strong legs to teach this marine a lesson. This was the first time Luffy had seen Sanji fight, so his poker face broke, and a huge grin took over in its place. Sanji grabbed the bleeding man from the floor, and held him up to his eyes level to speak to him fully. Don't go ruining a good dish. Messing with a chef of the sea is a pretty good and easy way to get yourself killed, Sanji said before dropping him into the mess on the floor and walking away. Are you sure about this guy Luffy? Zoro asked, not impressed with the show like Luffy was. Yup, he's the only one who will cook for our crew, Luffy said seriously, but the grin on his face and the way he was vibrating in excitement was showing his true emotions. Luffy thought Sanji looked cool enough to be one of them. Zeph came down from the kitchens along with many of the other chefs to see what was going on. Sanji, don't you get it? Customers are kings, a large man with bulky arms shouted as Zeph walked towards Sanji and the man. Patty, Sanji, if you wish to fight please do it elsewhere. Zeph then looked towards the mess while walking towards Sanji. And what is the meaning of this, Sanji? Zeph asked, staring down at the bloody marine who was beginning to get back on his feet. He wasted food, Sanji simply said as Patty let him go. Zeph closed his eyes before bringing his peg leg up and kicking Sanji over the head, knocking him to the ground. So you thought it was a good idea to teach him a lesson then, eh? Zeph asked Sanji, who was growling on the floor up at Zeph. His full body got back up, grinning in triumph over Sanji. You see, that's what customer service really is. He snarled down at Sanji, who just glared as Zeph kicked full body as well. What the hell is wrong with you people? He shouted at Zeph, who just gave him a dirty look. That's for wasting food in my restaurant, now get out. He shouted at the marine who was ready to run off the ship when the front doors were slammed open. A man who looked pale and thin walked in carefully, as if he wasn't about to fall over from exhaustion and what appeared to be starvation. It looks like another customer has arrived. Patty said, staring at the man, and even Sanji was giving him a look, but instead of anger it was almost a look of pity. The man sat down in one of the chairs, his face thin, and his stomach growling in agony. "I don't care what it is, just bring me food right now," he called out to whoever was listening. Patty welcomed him in a polite way, but Sanji knew Patty well enough now to know it was a false kindness. "Do you have any money to pay for this meal, shit customer?" Patty asked him, and the man pulled a gun from his cloths, pointing it at Patty. "How about a bullet through the head?" he said in anger, but Patty wasn't afraid. "If you don't have any money, then you're not welcome to eat here. Go starve somewhere else." Patty then threw the man out of the restaurant, leaving a relieved amount of people that the bad scary pirate had been dealt with. Luffy watched as Sanji turned, and silently left the dining room towards the kitchen, and smiled knowing Zeph had seen the same thing. He wanted to follow Sanji, but that feeling of familiarity was returning full force. Whoever was coming towards him was almost here, and a whole lot of trouble would happen right afterwards. Nami. Though Luffy said her name, neither looked at one another. MN. She knew he was giving her the chance to leave soon, but the timing felt off. "Someone's coming, and when they get here I want you to go," he said, slowly ignoring Zoro's eyes watching the two of them. "Who is it?" Nami asked quietly, but Luffy shook his head, not knowing quite yet himself. "Dunno, just do what you have to." She nodded understanding as Luffy stood up and walked towards the kitchens, hoping to find Sanji, and see what he was going to do about that hungry guy. I missed him." Leaving the kitchen, Luffy went outside to check on the weird guy instead, only to see Sanji place some food down in front of him. The guy refused the food, only for Sanji to give him some good advice to keep living. The things Luffy saw here was the reason he had chosen Sanji to be his cook. Sanji had heart, and that was something Luffy respected in a person. "You're lucky, you know. If Sanji hadn't fed you, you'd probably be dead," Luffy said, not sugarcoating his words as the man was sitting up from his deep bow to Sanji. "You two know each other?" the man asked, and Luffy nodded excitedly. "Sanji's my cook on my crew." Sanji felt a tick appear on his head. "Don't make shit up, Luffy." He sighed, but was flattered that Luffy wanted him, but his responsibility to this restaurant was more important than his dream. "I'm not, I already decided." All Sanji did was shake his head, knowing that he would be arguing with Luffy until the sun went down if he got into a fight right now. "So you're a pirate?" the guy asked, and Luffy laughed loudly. Of course. There was nothing in this world Luffy would ever want to be. "So you really did set out on your own this time?" Sanji said, and Luffy pouted slightly. "Haven't you been listening to me? You're going to be the cook on my ship?" Luffy shouted, but Sanji interrupted him. "Later, Luffy. Because later he would put the kid in his place if he continued to pressure him like that." "Sorry to interrupt, but my name is Jin and I'm a member of Don Krieg's pirate fleet," Jin said, bowing again. And Luffy closed his eyes, wishing he had spent more time with Haruto learning about the rival pirates. Then again, even if he had spent more time with her, he still probably wouldn't know any of them either way. "I'm Luffy, and I'm going to be the Pirate King," he said, giving his trademark smile. "Pirate King? Does this mean you're heading towards the Grand Line?" Jin asked, but the man looked frightened. "MN, I have people waiting for me there." Honestly, he couldn't wait to get back into home waters. The East Blue was fun at first, but now it was getting boring. "If I were you, I'd avoid the place no matter if people are waiting for you there or not," Jin recommended, but Luffy stopped smiling at that. "Why? I know paradise is crazy, but it can't be as bad as the New World." Luffy tried to think back to the times he was in paradise with his pops and truly didn't think it was as bad as Jin was saying. "Paradise? They call that place the Pirate's Graveyard," Jin shouted at him, and Sanji felt like telling the man to save his breath with Luffy. "Yeah, only if you're weak." Jin didn't like hearing those words from Luffy, especially since the kid said it with a smile. "What happened?" Sanji asked, lighting a new smoke. "I don't even know. We were just getting in when this man came out of nowhere and began to slice everything. I didn't even think my captain would escape, but he did. The thought of going back and running into a monster than that man is terrifying." Jin closed his eyes, trying to block out those memories. Sanji blew out some smoke. His eyes drifted over to Luffy, who was frowning. "I must return to Don Krieg as soon as possible. Sanji, Luffy, thank you for everything, it means a lot to me. And I hope we meet again someday," Jin said. And Luffy laughed softly, waving goodbye to the man as he sailed away on a small boat. "Luffy." Sanji was still staring towards the water, Is the Grand Line that bad? He had taken Jin's words seriously, so Luffy thought about it for a moment. Depends on who you run into, I guess. There are a lot of strong people there, but that's why you should only go if you're strong, otherwise someone stronger will wipe you out. Luffy said, having seen his family take out newcomers quite often. Oi brats, don't you have work to do? Zeph was standing over the balcony looking down at them, but his eyes were turned on to the Straw Hat Kid. Why'd I have to work more? Luffy asked, and Zeph smiled. Because it was you who blew that hole through my roof, Zeph said, but Luffy knew that it was just a new joke for the old man to laugh at. The extra work, but didn't say no as Sanji threw the empty dishes into the sea, and smirked at the old man, who shook his head and headed back inside. Why'd you throw the dishes away? He was confused on Sanji's actions. If there are no dishes, then there is no proof that I fed Jin. It was as simple as that, but it was enough for Luffy to get it. The afternoon began to pass with Luffy helping the restaurant, and Nami preparing the Mary secretly. Luffy was leaning back in a chair watching Sanji work, since he had given up when his observation haki alerted him to something was coming. What's going on? Sanji asked as Luffy silently got up and looked out the restaurant at a broken ship approaching them. Everyone followed him to see what was happening. That's when many began to shake in fear, knowing already who was at their front door. Sanji and Zeph just stared up at the ship, a look of annoyance on both of their faces. Luffy started to look closely at the ship, his eyes widening when he realized he recognized just what had happened to that poor thing. Of all the people you guys ran into him, Luffy whispered, recognizing his uncle's work from training with him. It doesn't seem like the damage was from cannons, Sanji said, trying to see why Luffy had gone silent, which was rare. It's not, and if they're still alive. Luffy felt like turning away, knowing that his uncle didn't let his prey leave him alive. Realization hit him then, and the feeling he recognized for the past day and a half became clear. His uncle was on his way to finish off this ship. A man in armor stepped forward on the ship, but his appearance was pale and thin, showing he hadn't eaten in many days. Mildly to Sanji and Luffy's surprise, Jin was supporting the man into the place, so they guessed this must be his captain. The man begged for food, which many of the people protested about. No one wanted the guy to have enough strength to get back on his feet and kill everyone. Luffy, just how strong are you? Sanji whispered to Luffy, who was giving a blank face at the scene. I'm strong. I faced people much stronger than these guys back home. The guy also looked too weak to fight, and Luffy wasn't one for taking advantage of people at their weakest. So if something happens, Sanji needed to know if Luffy would help defend their ship. You guys are my friends, and no one hurts my friends and gets away with it, Luffy clarified, and Sanji nodded, understanding that Luffy would help. The man was begging, and even though Sanji had the feeling that something was going to happen, he went and grabbed some food and wine for the man. Placing the things in front of Jin and his captain, he couldn't help but smile. Jin felt like crying in gratitude towards the chef who had been so kind to him. Krieg thanked Sanji as he stuffed the food in his mouth, not even bothering with a fork, he was so starved. One of the chefs went running past Luffy towards Sanji, shouting things, asking Sanji if he knew who this man was. He stated that the guy starving was the ruler of the East Blue, one of the strongest pirates around. Luffy looked closer at the man and shook his head, almost laughing at that statement. Strongest of the pirates? These people must never have met his pops and siblings before. The chef went on to tell all of the bad things this guy had done, and even Luffy had to admit they were pretty bad. Just as Luffy was deciding he really didn't like this guy, Krieg got up and knocked Sanji off his feet, ensuring Luffy's dislike towards him. Jin shouted at Krieg, but the man broke his arm once he stood up. People like Krieg really pissed Luffy off. Just like that cat guy, what's his name? This guy didn't deserve to be a captain of any crew. This is a pretty nice ship. I think I'll take it from you people, he said, looking around. On my ship there are about 100 men who are starving. If you value your lives, make something for them to eat, then get the hell off this ship, he said as Jin was begging him not to do anything. Sanji was getting up slowly. The attack knocked the breath out of him since he wasn't expecting it, though really he should have been. Once he was able to get back up on his feet, Sanji turned towards the kitchens to make the meals ordered to him. Luffy was considering kicking this guy's butt but wanted to wait for Sanji to ask first. These orders aren't going to make themselves. Once they're finished, do as you like, Sanji said to Luffy, then finished walking towards the kitchen. That's what I wanted to hear. The chef, Patty, wasn't so open to helping the pirates, and made that clear by pulling out a large gun and shooting a cannon at the pirate captain, sending him backwards. Luffy was stunned on what was going on, but the excitement in the air was something he hadn't felt since he was back home. Don Krieg got back up rather quickly, and began to shoot the chefs with guns underneath his shoulder armor. Krieg then shouted at them that they should follow his orders, and never to disobey him. Of course the chefs were ready to stand back up, and fight again when Zeph dropped a large bag of food in front of the man. "Take your orders and get out," he said as many chefs yelled to him. "You're Redfoot Zeph," Krieg said, and Zeph just stared at him. Luffy was looking at the old guy, now curious on who he was. The chefs were shouting at Zeph, but the old man just walked away before turning back to look at him. "You want this restaurant, fine, but tell me, do your men have the will left to fight? Did your will survive your defeat?" Zeph asked him, and many turned to look at Krieg, now in shock at the knowledge that he was defeated. One of them was talking about how Krieg, who had a fleet of 50 ships, couldn't make it on the Grand Line without having to turn back. The Grand Line? So this guy really did get chased out of paradise by Uncle. Luffy closed his eyes, knowing soon enough Haki would be here soon to finish the job. During Luffy's musings, Krieg started to tell the tale of Zeph and the rumors that came along with him. "Enough chit-chat here. What do you want from me?" Zeph asked, bring Luffy back to the conversation. "Redfoot Zeph, you survived the merciless waters of the Grand Line for an entire year. I want your captain's log on how you did it." Krieg said, a shadow over his face showing he was going to try and take that log no matter what. "What an idiot," Luffy said, suddenly causing the man to turn his eyes towards Luffy, who had his hands behind his head and eyes closed. "What was that, brat?" Krieg growled towards Luffy, who opened an eye to look at him. "You're an idiot. You failed in the first waters of paradise. Even with that log thingy, do you really think you'd get far?" Luffy asked him, which shocked a few people on who Luffy was talking to this pirate. "Oi, don't you know who this guy is?" one person shouted at Luffy, who shrugged. "Why should I care?" Luffy was bored and now hungry. Maybe the old man left some extra food in the back for him. "What do you know of the Grand Line, brat?" With that shout, Sanji felt like laughing. "So far more than you do. Do you really think the guy who turned your ship into firewood is really going to just let you go?" Luffy asked, his voice a deadly softness to it. "Just saying." "You know nothing, boy. I only failed because I didn't have enough information. But now I can fix all of that. Once I have your logbook, I will form another fleet and seize the legendary treasure, becoming the Pirate King," Krieg said as Luffy's brow twitched in annoyance. "No way, I'm the one who will be the Pirate King. I won't allow such a brat to talk to me like that. This isn't a game, kid," Krieg said, anger building even more now that this kid wouldn't stop butting in. "Yeah, I know, I'm still going to be the one who will conquer the Grand Line," Luffy said cockily to the man whose anger was bursting over now. "No you won't, we didn't have the right information. But my fleet of 5,000 men were wiped out in only 7 days, you brat. That sea is just plain hell," Krieg shouted at Luffy to fight off the smirk Sanji was sporting. "Hell is it? Well, that's just fine for me," Luffy said, thinking about how much he missed home waters. "Unlike you, I don't find anything you're saying to be funny. If you keep talking, kid, I'll crush you right here and now," Krieg said, and Luffy grabbed his arm, showing he was ready to fight. "Go ahead if you want. Unlike you, I've lasted more than 7 days in paradise." He had to get in a few more jabs at the man's pride. "You know it would be my pleasure to send you to an early grave," Krieg threatened. Sanji moved towards Zeph and whispered to him something that caused the smile he had been fighting off. "Think we should tell this guy whose crew Luffy comes from?" Sanji asked, and Zeph shook his head. "Why don't we keep that little bit of information to ourselves for now? Even if Krieg made it through paradise, if word ever reached that Emperor's crew that Luffy had been threatened, no matter the number, Krieg's crew would have been destroyed. Luffy, we don't have all day to play with weaklings like him." Luffy didn't have to turn around to know Zoro was there with Usopp, who surprisingly stood tall beside the swordsman. "It's not like these guys could touch Luffy either way," Usopp said, bringing a larger smile to Luffy's face, not because of the compliment, but because Luffy could hear the quiver of fear in his sniper's voice. "Hey guys, Thatch said it's rude not to listen to people who challenge you even if they're weak," Luffy said, looking back at his friends. "Are those 2 people a part of your crew? What a small group, you guys would never make it on the Grand Line." Krieg laughed, which was beginning to annoy Luffy with all this never make it talk. "They're not all. I still have 2 other members," he said, holding up 2 fingers towards Krieg as Sanji shouted at him. Krieg looked down at Luffy and Zeph before picking up his bag of food and making his way out of the ship, not before giving the group his warning to leave or die. Once he left, Luffy turned to look at Zeph, hoping to get the old man to understand what was going to happen. "I don't like getting involved in things like this." Luffy began as Usopp shouted at him, saying he got involved in this stuff all the time. "But I can't leave things as they are. I'm stronger than that guy, so there's nothing to worry about if you just let me kick his ass," Luffy said to Zeph, his face serious but almost blank. "Kid, you're brave, I'll give you that. But what makes you think you stand a chance against Don Krieg?" Patty shouted at Luffy, but Zeph placed a hand on the chef's shoulder, stopping him. "If anyone stands a chance against Krieg, it would be you, boy. If one of Whitebeard's sons can't stop him, no one can." Zeph turned away, leaving a bunch of people staring at Luffy funny, and even a few dropped jaws. "Even if you're one of his sons, how can you actually stop him by yourself?" a chef shouted in fear. "I've been fighting pirates since, I dunno, I was 10, maybe 12. It didn't matter really to Luffy though. That guy's only strong because he has a lot of people. But if the people are weak, does it matter the number? Pops had a lot of sons, but each and every one of them could kick ass on any given day." "Oi, old man, don't tell Pops and Ma what's going on. He really didn't feel like dealing with home again just yet. Wasn't planning on it, brat," Zeph said, sitting down in a chair. Luffy walked up to him and squatted down to look at him. "There's something I want to try on those guys, but I need you to keep your friends away from me while I do it." Zeph raised a brow at him, telling him to explain. "Sometimes when I'm mad at people, something happens, and they end up falling asleep," he said, thinking back to the times he used his weird feeling. "That sounds like hockey." Zeph was no stranger to hockey, he had been to the New World a few times. "Right, that's what Ma called it, but it's not like my other hockey abilities. I want to try and use that one on them, but I don't know if I can." Luffy had only been able to randomly use that hockey. It was so unpredictable that he was taking a risk even mentioning it. "And if it doesn't work?" Zeph asked. "Then I'll still kick all their asses either way." While Luffy and Zeph were having their quiet conversation, the chefs were getting worked up, grabbing weapons and knives to help defend the restaurant alongside Luffy. "Kid, I don't care whose son you are. If you're going to fight to protect this place, then we'll help you," they said, and Luffy smiled at them, nodding. Zoro and Usopp looked down at Luffy, a grin on their faces at the way he was handling himself in this situation. All was starting to feel normal when Johnny and Yosaku barged into the place, freaking out. "What's going on?" Zoro asked them, walking towards them. "It's Nami, sis. She's taken off with the ship and the treasure." Usopp paled and Zoro gritted his teeth at the news. "What? How dare she?" Usopp growled, since that ship was a gift from Kaya. "Luffy, did you hear?" Zoro asked his captain, who didn't seem to react at all. "Yeah, I already know," he said, shrugging, causing the small group to look at him. "What do you mean you know?" Zoro asked slowly. "I told her to. She has something she needs to take care of, so I told her to go on ahead." Zoro closed his eyes, calming his nerves, knowing that Nami hadn't betrayed them if Luffy ordered her to go on without them. "Why didn't you tell us?" Usopp asked, confused. "It's been kinda busy here. I didn't really have much time," he said honestly, then turned to Jin. "I think I know what happened to you guys when you got to the Grand Line," Luffy said sadly to the man who was still on the floor, shivering in fear. "Do you? Because I still don't understand what happened. One man came out of nowhere, has destroyed all of our ships like it was nothing. If a storm hadn't have happened, he might have destroyed our flagship as well. I just want to forget. It was like a terrible nightmare." His eyes were like a hawk's, cold and murderous. His gaze alone felt like we were all going to die, Jin said, which made Luffy feel pity for the man. Zoro was now gripping the railing to the stairs tightly, knowing just who was being talked about. "I'm sorry, of all the people you could have run into, it had to be him." Luffy remembered Mihawk's eyes all too well, and the fear they could bring if they were set upon you in anger, but mostly boredom. "That can only be the one known as Hawkeye. Your description of him is dead on," Zeph said, his gaze catching Luffy. "You were a fool to think he'd just let you go," Luffy said, walking out of the restaurant with Zoro following behind him. "Hawkeye Mihawk is the man I have been searching for," Zoro said to Luffy, who nodded, sensing Usopp right behind them. "I know you want to meet him, but Nami is going to need our help, and I promised her I'd save her." Luffy turned to look at Zoro full on. "I want you to take Johnny and Yosaku and go after her," he said, then turned to Usopp. I have this. This is the one we will be dealing with next. I can't come yet, since I have stuff to deal with here and need to get Sanji to officially join, so go on without me. Alright, we'll go after her. You can count on us. Usopp said, and Luffy thanked him, smiling as Usopp ran off to get Johnny and Yosaku ready to go. Zoro, the swordsman, sighed but nodded. She's one of us, he said, rubbing the back of his head in defeat. She needs us, all of us. Luffy smiled, but realized that the pirates on the other broken ship were beginning to freak out. What's their problem? Luffy asked, but a feeling he really didn't need hit him hard. Why now, uncle? He growled under his breath, causing Zoro to look at him funny. I can't believe he followed us all the way from the Grand Line, Krieg shouted in fear and anger. As a bunch of pirates began to shout battle cries ready to attack the restaurant, a few slices were made along the ship, breaking it into even more pieces. Everyone's eyes widened, but Luffy frowned at the man he loved like an uncle. Zoro was seeing the man he had sworn to defeat before him so soon. Luffy took off to try and get as close as he could without him drowning in the sea to see his uncle, and maybe get him to go away now that he's finished cutting up that ship. Zeph walked out beside Luffy at the ship's edge, his eyes wide as he caught sight of the man who just cut that giant ship. That man is Hawkeye, Zeph said, confirming to Zoro that this was in fact the man he was looking for. Zoro, Luffy said softly, but his eyes never left Mihawk. Luffy, that's the man I've been looking for. Zoro's eyes were overshadowed as Luffy's own had darkened his face. You promised Luffy that you wouldn't get in the way of my ambition, Zoro said, walking towards Mihawk, who had sailed closer to the ships. Luffy didn't say anything, because Zoro was right, he did promise not to get in his way. I've never seen a sword handled so gently, or with amazing grace. Zoro complimented Mihawk, who turned his eyes towards Zoro. There's no grace in swords play based on force, he drawled out in a dry tone. Was it you who destroyed this ship? Zoro asked, but Mihawk didn't even look at him. Then it is true, you're the best, Zoro said, the large grin on his face showing his excitement. I set sail with 2 reasons. The first was to find you and the second was to meet up with my captain, Zoro said, touching his sword. And what is your goal then? Mihawk asked. To beat you, and become the best. Mihawk could hear the determination behind this kid's voice, but determination was nothing without strength to back it up. Zoro tied his bandana over his head, showing Luffy he was serious as he pulled out his blade. You've got some spare time, so let's do this, Zoro said, smirking, but Mihawk turned his eyes towards another who was watching them carefully. Are you really going to let me kill one of your crewmates, Luffy? Mihawk asked, stunning Zoro and everyone else who was now turning towards Luffy, their mouths dropped or eyes wide. Yeah, I'd like you not to do that, Uncle Haki. The chefs were all starstruck with the way Luffy was talking to Mihawk. Zeph laughed quietly, knowing this kid had some sort of gift on how to get past people's defenses like this. You know from experience I don't show mercy to those who challenge me, Mihawk said to him, and Luffy nodded, remembering all the times his uncle tried to slice him to bits during his 1-week training. Zoro had enough, so he turned to Luffy in surprise and even anger for not knowing this information. Why didn't you tell me? He shouted as Luffy shrugged at him. It never really came up, and would it have changed anything? Zoro would still go after Haki no matter what, so the information wasn't really needed. Also, Luffy had forgotten all about his uncle for a while and focused on his new crew. Enough! Are you here to challenge me or not? Mihawk asked, getting bored of this. Yeah, I'm still calling you out, Mihawk, he said, deciding to deal with Luffy later. If you truly are a competent swordsman, then you should be able to tell the differences between our skills even before we cross blades. I do wish to know why you are challenging me. I know Luffy is a stubborn fool, but I expected better from his crewmates, Mihawk said, looking Zoro over. It is my ambition that drives me, that and a promise, Zoro said, placing one of his swords in his mouth and the others in his hands ready to fight. You've begun to coat your blades in armament, Mihawk said, slightly impressed for a man from the East Blue. Luffy isn't the only strong one, he said, but Mihawk looked at him sternly, if not in that same bored expression. Strength comes in many different forms, and while you have begun learning Haki, can you use it to the best of its abilities? He asked. Zoro just positioned himself to fight. Luffy knew Zoro was going to lose the moment he stepped forward in front of Mihawk. The only thing keeping him on that railing was the promise he had made with Zoro not to interfere with his dreams, even if it got him killed. Mihawk pulled the cross from around his neck and shows that it was a small dagger pointing it at Zoro. "What do you think you'll do with that?" Zoro asked, shocked at the small blade. "It will be more than enough for you, I mean. Would you really wish to kill a fly with a cannon?" Mihawk said. Luffy's eyes widened at the humility that was being given to Zoro. Even when Luffy was being trained by Haki, the black blade was used to attack him day and night. "You may have a reputation here on the East Blue, but this sea is the weakest of them all, isn't that right, Luffy?" Mihawk asked, but didn't turn his eyes away from Zoro. "MN," Luffy whispered, knowing full well how slow this sea was compared to the Grand Line. "Unfortunately, I don't carry any blade smaller than this one, so it will have to do," he said, causing Zoro to shake slightly in anger. "I've had about enough of you, and your stupid attitude," Zoro shouted before moving into attack. "You are still too small with no real idea how big this world really is," Mihawk said under his breath in what Luffy discovered might have been anger, but it was the first time he had heard that tone come from his uncle. Zoro's attack was easily stopped with that small blade. Even if the three of his were tipped in Haki, Mihawk's skills was far more superior to Zoro's. Luffy sat on the sidelines, but watched the battle carefully, but sitting out really hurt him. He wanted to help fight and protect his nakama, but how can he do that if they didn't let him in? The battle carried on, but it wasn't much of a battle. While Zoro was strong now and he had been training, Mihawk was New World strong and Zoro was barely first half of the Grand Line strong. It wasn't until Mihawk stabbed Zoro with his small dagger that Luffy stood up and growled, his protective nature telling him to fight. "You have lost, yet you won't step back. Why is that?" Mihawk asked, the blade still in Zoro's chest. "Because if I step back I will be shattering the promises I have made, and for that I will not run. I would lose my honor, and without that I would have absolutely nothing left," Zoro said, keeping eye contact with Mihawk. "But that is exactly what defeat is, losing your honor," Mihawk clarified for the boy. "Then I won't accept that," he said stubbornly. "Then you shall die here." Mihawk was giving him an escape, but this boy refused to move. "I'd rather die than step away and give up," Zoro said sternly. Mihawk stared at him a little longer before removing the blade and putting it away. "What is your name?" Mihawk asked, wanting to know just who this boy was that it caught the attention of his previous student. "My name is Roronoa Zoro," he said as Mihawk pulled out the black blade. "I shall remember that. It's been quite some time since I've run into someone with such a strong will. As a courtesy to your strength I shall use my black blade to take your life," Mihawk said, showing the sword to Zoro. "Thanks," he said simply before moving into attack with his strongest attack, only for Mihawk to cut him down and break his other two swords with the black blade. Putting his sacred sword away, he turned to look at Mihawk and spread his arms out to the side, baring his chest for the man. "What are you doing?" Mihawk asked in slight surprise. "Scars on the back are a swordsman's shame," Zoro said with a smile, and Mihawk returned it. "Perfect." He found this boy to be what he was looking for as he brought his black blade down Zoro's chest, slicing him open for the whole to see. Luffy had enough coating his arm in Haki. He jumped at his uncle, past friendship or not, he was going to make him pay for hurting one of his nakama. Luffy's fist collided with Mihawk's blade, stopping the rubber boy from moving forward. "Why'd you kill him, uncle?" Luffy growled out as Mihawk pushed Luffy to the ground, looking at him. "Your friend isn't dead," he said, simply allowing Luffy to stand up now that he knew Zoro was alive. "But you don't let people go that challenge you," Luffy stated, knowing his uncle LL. Luffy, before Mihawk could respond to the boy, Luffy's attention was caught onto Zoro, who had been placed into the ship Usopp and the others had ready to go after Nami. "Zoro," he called to his friend, needing to hear he was really alive. "It's still early for someone like you to die." Mihawk set his attention towards the small ship as well. "My name is Hawkeye Mihawk, and though you are strong, both you and your captain have much to learn. Grow together. No matter how many years it will take, I shall hold my title as the greatest swordsman. When the time comes I shall be waiting for you, but until then become stronger. Become worthy enough to face me, Roronoa Zoro." Mihawk then turned to Luffy, looking at him carefully, seeing how the boy had changed from when he was 14. "Do you still carry that same goal after all these years, Luffy?" Mihawk asked, and Luffy nodded. "I will become the Pirate King," he said, and Mihawk smirked at him. "That may be harder to achieve than your friend's goal," he said, and Luffy stuck his tongue out at his uncle. "Who cares, it's my dream and I'll make it real," Luffy said to his uncle, who nodded at the boy captain. Your family has raised you well, Luffy. You and that boy make a good team. I'll be sure to pass that on to your old man and mother." Mihawk said, having had enough fun for that day and was ready to return to the Grand Line. Luffy looked back towards Zoro, not having heard from him yet, only to see a sword being held up to the sky. "Can you hear me, Luffy?" Zoro choked out. And Luffy shouted back at him, letting him know his voice had been heard loud and clear. "I'm sorry I failed you. As your first mate and right-hand man, I can't afford to be this weak." Zoro got out, but he was breathing hard. Luffy felt like smacking him for those words, but let his friend finish. "I swear to you, Luffy, from this day forward I will never lose again," Zoro called out, and Luffy could hear the tears in his voice. "Do you have any problems with that, Pirate King?" Sighing, then grinning his large smile, Luffy chirped out a nope. Zoro would live, and Mihawk would have a story to worry his ma with. But for now all was going to be okay. Luffy looked off into the distance, knowing his crew would be alright, knowing that Zoro was going to live. "Are you sure that was a good idea, Luffy? Letting your friends leave you all alone to fight here?" Sanji asked, eyeing Luffy as the boy stood tall, his eyes never leaving the direction his friends had gone. "MN, all I have to do now is kick his ass, right?" Luffy asked Sanji, who nodded. The other chefs out on the deck watching Luffy carefully, now realizing that Luffy wasn't just all talk. He really was a son of Whitebeard, and apparently the nephew of Hawkeye. "You say that like fighting Don Krieg will be easy, Luffy?" Sanji said, blowing some smoke into the air as Luffy laughed, bouncing on his feet ready to fight. She, it will be easy, and maybe kinda fun." He gave his large smile before bouncing onto one of the destroyed pieces of ship Uncle Haki had left behind. "Oi dummy. You're lucky to be alive, ya know," Luffy yelled up at Krieg, who turned his eyes down towards Luffy, glaring hatefully at him. "I don't want to hear that from a snot-nosed brat like you," he shouted before ordering his men to attack. "Captain, did you see how he talked to that man? Maybe we should get out of here," someone on Krieg's crew shouted, only to be shot in the chest. "This kid may have guts, but that's why we need that old chef's logbook. If we get a hold of that, it might tell us how to survive in the Grand Line, and stand a chance against freaks like this boy, and that swordsman. It may also give me information on the Great One Piece as well that could easily make me the new king of the pirates," Krieg said, his eyes turned down to Luffy, who wasn't smiling at this point in time. Luffy knew he was going to be king, so taking a deep breath he looked at Sanji, and put his smile back on his face. "Looks like it's my turn to show what I can do. Shitty bastards showing up, and ruining people's meals," Sanji said coldly before aiming some well-placed kicks into a few pirates' heads, sending them flying back into the sea. "I'm counting on you, Sanji," Luffy said, his smile threatening to split his face as his eyes turned back and stared right at Krieg. "Right, just don't die, shithead." Sanji pushed his cigarette into a man's head, causing him to scream before getting a kick under the chin. "I won't die," he said happily, not a trace of fear in his voice, before running along the broken pieces of the ship towards Krieg. Krieg, though not very smart, knew now that this brat wasn't as weak as he thought. Sanji was making sure the fins came up along the ship while spending an annoying amount of time having to explain to the others his reasoning. This place is going to become a battlefield, especially with someone like Luffy around. By putting up the fins we can ensure the battle stays out here, keeping the inside safe so that shitty old geezer doesn't complain as much, Sanji said to the chefs, who nodded in understanding. "What was that, you brat?" Zeph said causally, getting Sanji to not even look at him as he responded with a simple, "You heard me." "Sanji, I want you to pay close attention to how Luffy fights," Zeph said, now taking the conversation seriously. "Why is that? Don't we have enough going on right now?" Sanji wanted to just get into protecting his home. "Just do it, brat." Zeph knew people like Luffy didn't ever come into people's lives without a good reason. Maybe he could be the one to show Sanji a better chance. "So you come here, and try to destroy the place that gave you food? Sorry, but my big brother would be disgraced if I didn't at least try, and beat some manners into you," Luffy said, holding onto a piece of mast, but if he had the chance he would have picked his nose. "You think I'm going to let a freak like you anywhere near me? I saw how you talked with that guy before. If you think I'll give you an inch, you're wrong. You who possess one of the legendary devil fruits can no longer swim, isn't that right, kid? Are you sure it's worth having a fight on the waters like this?" Krieg laughed before his shoulder protectors opened up, showing a machine gun behind them, and began to shoot at Luffy. "Is that the best you've got? I've been fighting on the sea since I was little. It's going to take a lot more than water to scare me away, Luffy said, but he put on his smile almost to mock Krieg in Luffy's own special way. Luffy then grabbed the mast of the ship to help pull himself closer only for Krieg to push Luffy away. This fight wasn't hard for Luffy, in fact it was more annoying than anything since he wanted to try his haki out, but didn't want his friends to be close when he did it. While Luffy was still working on getting close to Krieg, he overheard some chefs with his observation haki, which brought a softer smile to Luffy's face rather than his trademark one. I've worked at a lot of places, and gotten fired from each and every one of them, because of my rough ways of living hard. One of the chefs said, "We, after years of wandering, found a place here to call home, so we're not letting you take this place." The others shouted at a group of the pirates who laughed at them along with Krieg. Closing his eyes, Luffy saw Pops laughing, a filled wooden mug in his hands, and the family laughing along with him. Pops had given many of his siblings a place to call home, him as well, so he understood the love these chefs had for this place. The two chefs who had stood up before were beaten by a dinner plate-looking guy, allowing the said man to introduce himself to Sanji. Since Krieg really wasn't a threat to him, Luffy chose to watch Sanji to see what he would do. Krieg also seemed interested for whatever reason, so it wasn't a big deal for Luffy to look away, even if he had been trained never to. Sanji and Zeph looked flat out pissed by the plate guy, which caused Luffy to laugh a little at their expressions. It got worse when a smaller pirate went and tried to steal a kitchen knife from the knocked-down chef, only to be kicked in the chest by an enraged Sanji for trying. Catching the knife carefully with skills he had learned over the years, he placed it back into his fellow chef's hands and glared at the pirates who dared to try and take it before giving them the ass-kicking of their lives. "Once I filleted you shitty bastards, you'll realize we're not just mere cooks here," Sanji said almost quietly, his eyes overshadowed, creating a demonic look for the gentleman. The giant plate guy scoffed at Sanji, but Sanji pointed his foot at him in response, letting him know that his hands were too precious to be damaged in a simple fight. The plate guy explained himself to Sanji, but it was rather stupid, to be honest. If that outfit was to keep him safe, couldn't he have found something that made him look less like a dish? Luffy wasn't paying attention, but really he didn't need to. Krieg had shouted at Luffy before throwing a ball and chain at him that he dodged easily enough, because he knew it was coming. Even though Luffy's skills of haki were pretty good, the mast he had let go of was slippery and wet, causing him to lose his footing and fall backwards fast onto the giant plate guy, knocking him over, causing him to bleed. "Luffy!" Sanji yelled, causing Luffy to look at his friend, then look at the plate guy who was beginning to do some weird thing with his hands. "Sorry, did I get in the way?" Luffy asked Sanji, who just shook his head, but then looked confused as everyone around was freaking out towards the plate man. "What is that guy doing?" Sanji asked quietly as Luffy began to pick his nose, just staring. "It was just a nosebleed. I mean, if he can't handle a little blood, maybe he shouldn't be a pirate," Luffy said in a dull voice before the guy caught fire. It took a lot for Luffy to stop his cool radar from going off and just watch the man burn, sort of. The guy then shot his flames out more, catching a few others on fire as well. Luffy, having lived with Ace and sharing a room with the Pyro Man for a long time, had gotten used to avoiding flames, but Sanji, who had only used flames in cooking, had not. Yusufi knew Sanji wouldn't be fast enough to avoid getting hit by them, so he head-butted his friend in the chest, knocking him off his feet and away from the flames. Unfortunately, saving Sanji had resulted in his pants catching fire, which resulted in Luffy running around trying to smack out the flames that were beginning to burn his rubbery skin. Sanji looked around him as his home began to burn down around him. Luffy, having put his own fire out, breathed a sigh of relief, only to grit his teeth when Sanji decided to charge the plate guy to end the fire and save his home. Luffy cared for his friends above all else in this world, and the idea that Sanji could get injured by an overgrown dinner plate pissed him off. Jumping through the fire following Sanji, he realized that Sanji was so far okay, but that didn't mean he wasn't going to watch and wait. "But everyone is afraid of this fire. What's wrong with you people?" Plate guy shouted out as Sanji smirked. "If I was afraid of fire, I would never make it as a chef," he said with pride as Luffy grinned, crossing his arms over his chest. "My big brother is fire itself, and he told me never to fear the flames," Luffy said as Ace's smile filled up his memory. Sanji didn't waste any time and kicked through the guy's shield, making him bleed some more. "What would you like me to do, Sanji?" Luffy asked his friend, but Sanji turned his way, brow twitching. "I didn't ask you to follow me in here, Luffy," Why aren't you fighting Krieg? Didn't you say you were going to kick his shitty ass? Sanji growled at Luffy, who pouted. I was worried about you, ya know. Luffy pouted some more, turning his face slightly away from Sanji, who sighed as Plate Guy got back up, rambling on about how he was going to kill them. Plate, who Luffy had learned was really called Pearl, began to shoot fireballs everywhere at the ship, planning on burning it down with everything around it. Sanji looked towards where they were heading with a slightly widened eye. But Luffy didn't know what he should do in this moment. Zeph saw them coming, and with a wave of his peg leg they died out. That was, Luffy said in awe, looking at the man, a new respect filling his being. Zeph had been a chef who survived paradise, and even made it to home. Luffy should have expected the man to know how to handle one of the 6 powers. Pearl seemed to be even more afraid, but that was the least of Luffy's worries right now. A giant spiked ball came flying at Luffy, and Sanji, startling the chef for a moment, causing him to freeze up. Oh yeah, I forgot about you, Luffy said, remembering Krieg again, and that he needed his ass kicked. Catching the giant weapon, he pushed it back with a Gomu Gomu no Bazooka, then standing protectively in front of Sanji until another piece of the ship fell, giving him away to Krieg. Hurry up and kick his ass, Luffy. What's taking you so long, ya shitty bastard? Sanji asked, lifting his new cigarette over one of the flames that surrounded the ship's deck. Yeah right, sorry. Luffy set off handily before jumping on the mast and charging Krieg. The ball and chain was swung back at Luffy, but Luffy caught the chain part, pulling the man forward, knocking him off balance. Do you really think you stand a chance, boy? Krieg growled, picking himself back up as Luffy waited for him. All you do is just hide behind your weapons, what a coward. Luffy scowled up at him as Krieg's brow twitched. Once the Plate Guy had been taken care of, Sanji was mildly surprised to find that Jin had broken Zeph's peg leg, holding him with a gun to his head. Sanji, if you fight any more I will kill this man, Jin said emotionlessly, his eyes overshadowed and dark. Sanji gritted his teeth, looking at Jin, who was holding back a man he had admired for a better part of his life. In Sanji's pause, Pearl, or the Plate Guy in Luffy's mind, had gotten back up and continued to beat on Sanji. Where Luffy was proud of Sanji's loyalty to Zeph and the care he showed for the older man, Luffy really wanted Sanji to fight back. Sanji, fight back! Luffy yelled at his friend as he sat against the wall, his face bleeding from the beating Plate Guy had given him. I can't, I won't, if I do then Zeph will die. This place is my home, and that geezer's life. I've already taken everything important from him, I refuse to take anything else from him ever again. Sanji yelled, standing up only to get smashed in the head by Plate Guy. Luffy lost it in his anger. He turned towards Krieg, who was laughing, and glared hard. It's not time. Zeph yelled, causing Luffy to stop before he did what he wanted to do, as Luffy turned his eyes towards the old chef on the ground that was looking towards him. It's not time, brat, don't let your impatience hinder you. Oh, but Luffy wanted to be impatient and knock each and every one of these people out. Shut up, old man, Jin said to Zeph as Sanji stood back up, everyone shocked that he was able to stand once again. That old man gave everything so that I could be alive today. There's no other way to repay him than for me to risk my life for him, Sanji shouted. Luffy's eyes were blank as he turned towards Krieg. You have 10 minutes, after that I won't hesitate any longer, Luffy said quietly, but Krieg ignored him, so Luffy turned back to stare at Sanji, his countdown beginning. Sending his foot high into the air, Luffy brought it down with a crash, breaking a large part of the deck that was holding the pirates. Luffy, stop, Sanji yelled, but with dark eyes Luffy continued to beat down on the ship. Krieg began to yell at his commander to kill Zeph, but Luffy's dark eyes froze him in slight fear. You now have 7 minutes, so I'd stop freaking out. It's not like I sank this ship or anything, but I think I just might, Luffy said coldly, not really looking at anyone. Stop it, Luffy. This isn't your fight at all. Sanji had never wanted to hit Luffy before, but now he was considering it. I thought we were friends. Those words did hurt, but Luffy knew what he was doing was something his own family would have done if needed to. Sanji, if this place is gone, then there won't be any more reason to fight. Luffy looked at things in a simple way. If people were fighting over a something, just get rid of what that was, then the fighting would stop. This place saved me. It gave me a home, and I owe my entire life to this place. I won't ever let you take that away from me, Luffy, Sanji yelled. But Zeph smiled, knowing Luffy knew more than any on how Sanji was feeling. Sanji, are you going to die for a stupid place like this? Sanji growled at Luffy. But Luffy wasn't looking away. "You know that makes you a bigger idiot than that stupid captain there," he said, talking about Krieg. "What did you just say?" Sanji shouted, but Luffy wasn't letting go yet. "Dying isn't going to repay anyone, you can only do that by living," Luffy shouted, and pushed Sanji away, his eyes turning back towards Krieg, who had his arms crossed watching the action. "Your time is now 5. Plague Guy got back up, and began to ramble on about something Luffy wasn't paying attention to until he started to do his fire thingy again. "You should just shut up," Luffy said to him, his pupils widening, a wave of anger hitting Pearl, shocking many as he fell to the ground, his eyes rolled back in his head. What was that?" Someone shouted as Jin stepped away from Zeph in shock and fear. Krieg, not understanding hockey, or ever even knowing what it was, thought it was Jin that did something to Pearl. "Jin, you have betrayed your captain and your ship," Krieg shouted, confusing Luffy since it was him who had knocked out Plate Guy, though secretly Luffy was happy he was even able to use his haki now to just make it work a second time. "I know, but I cannot do it, Sanji, this place, they saved us, I can't kill them, not like this," Jin said, accepting that the moment he stepped away from Zeph he was betraying his captain and crew. "Make no mistake though, I will be the one to kill Sanji. I just would rather give him the dignity to face death standing up." Point his weapon at Sanji. "Thanks for that, asshole," Sanji said, glaring at Jin. "You too, boy, I will be taking your life as well," Jin said, but Luffy laughed. "Sorry, but I'm not afraid of you or your stupid crew." Luffy chuckled a bit, his countdown still on in his head. "You don't get it, do you, boy? We're the Krieg pirates, rulers of the East Blue," Jin yelled at Luffy, only for him to fully burst out laughing. "And I'm Luffy. But it doesn't take much to rule the East Blue. I mean, the only real reason you guys are on top is because you outnumber the others. Numbers may scare others, but not me. I was born from a crew much bigger than yours," Luffy smiled. "Luffy, why do you make a habit of pissing off as many people as possible?" Sanji sighed, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath of smoke. "Really, what do you mean, Jin? You take care of the cook, that brat is all mine," Krieg said. Luffy grinned. But inside he knew time was almost up for this pathetic excuse of a crew. "You said I have 5 minutes before, what's my time at now, boy?" Krieg said to Luffy. 3. Huh, so that's 3 minutes to kill you, huh? You hear that, Jin? You have 3 minutes to kill that chef, do I make myself clear? Jin nodded, knowing with such a short time limit like that he'll have to go all out to do so. "Thanks, Luffy," Sanji said sarcastically, not very happy that he's been put on a time limit. "I fought people like you before, boy. Those who have the powers of the devil fruits are good only for so long before they are easy to see through. Your trickery won't work on me, brat. You'll have to use more than a little magic to beat me." The ruler of the East Blue, Krieg ranted, but Luffy gave him a straight face in return. "I'm tired of your voice, let's end this here and now," Luffy said, leaving Sanji to fight Jin, and him to finally end Krieg. Luffy found Krieg to be like a Swiss knife. Those knives that had everything in them when opened. First, Krieg pulled out a spiked cape that Luffy had no trouble punching, surprising the man, especially when he saw Luffy's bloodied knuckles. Then when he got back on his feet, Krieg pulled out what appeared to be a battle spear that exploded when it touched things. "That would be cool, but it's not," Luffy said, stepping away and holding onto the broken mast stump for support. "Now you've done it, kid, no one ever escapes my mighty battle spear," Krieg said in glee as Luffy just looked at it. Krieg brought it down again as Luffy caught it in his hands, allowing it to explode. "So if I touch there," Luffy thought out loud, an idea coming to his mind as he continued to punch the spear, taking the explosions each time. Krieg laughed as a little blood fell from the places it had hit, only to finally get a look at what had happened to his spear. "Now that your toy's broken, you're nothing. Without its blade part, it's just like a stupid bomb on a stick, and let's face it, that's pretty boring," Luffy said, scratches on him, but nothing significant. "You think so, huh?" He then brought out more weapons, which Luffy smiled, accepting the challenge for now. Sanji and Jin's fight had been as well matched as ever. People kept saying Jin was heartless, but proved he did have a heart towards Sanji after giving the chef a good beating. Jin's tears showed that even the coldest of hearts can be melted by the act of kindness. "I can't, Sanji saved my life. I can't kill him, I'm so sorry, Captain," Jin cried out. Luffy felt a notch of pity for the man who stood over a bloodied Sanji. "Jin," Luffy whispered as Krieg began to yell at him. Sanji treated me like a normal person with decency and respect. How can I kill someone who saved my life? Jin cried, tears flowing down his face as memories passed through his eyes. Please, can't we just leave these people alone, just this once? Jin asked through his tears, which only set Krieg into a rage. Do you truly think you can disobey me, and then tell me what to do? You are dismissed from being my combat commander, you weakling. Pirates, move out of the way. He opened up his armor on his hand, preparing something, as the pirates around began to scramble, screaming about poison. Luffy gave Jin a sad look before turning towards Krieg. Taking a deep breath, he tried to picture himself as Marco facing down a powerful foe threatening his family. Time's up. Luffy said, a memory of so long ago filling his heart as he let the shadows over his eyes fade. Krieg just looked at Luffy in confusion once again. What was that? Krieg screamed while Luffy remembered something his ma had once said to a group of pirates before giving them the beating of their lives. I gave you time to surrender, now you can go to hell, or something like that. Luffy said, copying something that had once stuck with him after that terrible day. You're nothing but a stupid brat who's in over his head, now die, boy, Krieg said, putting a gas mask over his face as many started to do the same thing. Oi, old man, was I patient enough this time? Luffy asked, not bothering to turn around as Zeph laughed loudly at those words. Just do it, you damn brat. That was all Luffy needed to hear as he turned and glared at Krieg, letting all of his anger and frustration slip through his will, causing a wave of power to overflow, attacking all those weaker than himself. Krieg hadn't been expecting the haki to hit him at all, but even though he was weak, he still had the strong desire to take the restaurant, which kept him more awake than his crew was. You who hides behind your crew and cheap tricks doesn't deserve to sail on these seas. Even if you do make it to paradise, there are people there way stronger than you, and even stronger than me. You can rule the East Blue for all I care, but never forget that this sea is the weakest for a reason, Luffy said to Krieg, who was trying not to lose consciousness and failing. Sanji felt his body shake as he looked at his hands, trying to stop them from trembling. What just happened? His cigarette had fallen out of his mouth, his eyes turning towards Luffy, who stood there before jumping down on the wooden pieces heading towards him. That was something known as Conqueror's Haki. Very few have it, and even fewer ever are able to use it. Zeph said, moving to stand beside Sanji was sitting on the broken deck as Luffy tried not to fall into the water. Luffy is able to. Sanji looked around, his eyes falling on Jin, who had passed out as well from the wave of haki. I'm glad he's on our side, because people like Luffy are hell to fight. They will fight until they either win or are dead, Zeph said to Sanji, who stared at the now clumsy boy in wonder and even amazement. Luffy was excited to get to Sanji, but was pulled back when a metal net caught around him, dragging him backwards. Luffy was so excited that he had won, and was able to successfully use his haki that he let his guard down and his observation slip. This isn't over yet, boy. If Luffy had the moment, he would have been surprised that Krieg had managed to pull himself back together after his haki. I'm not strong enough yet, he thought out loud, struggling to get out of the tangled mess of netting. His haki was good enough to knock out weaker people and many of the surrounding chefs, but it wasn't strong enough to take out everyone. Maybe it was because he had used it already on that plate guy earlier. Krieg spun Luffy around and around, laughing as Luffy was finally able to free his arms and legs through some of the holes in the netting. Smiling to himself, Luffy stretched his arms and grabbed Krieg by his shoulders, allowing himself to be wound up tight, then unspun himself along with Krieg into the air, bringing him down hard, breaking his armor on the rubble. Sanji, I need some help, Luffy asked as he fell into the water. You might want to follow through with that request, as you may know devil fruit users cannot swim, Zeph said to a dazed Sanji, when quickly swore and dove into the water to save Luffy from a sad death. Looking for Luffy wasn't easy. Because of the sunken ship's piscine, he did find Luffy. He almost let out his breath in relief. Pulling Luffy from the netting, he carried the boy up to the surface, but along the way his mind wandered to the way Luffy fought, and also to the way that swordsman Zoro fought. Both had stood up for their dreams, willing to do whatever it took to achieve them, even die for them. Hey Luffy, don't you dare die. I promised your stupid brother I would watch over you, and I really don't need him causing trouble here, Sanji said, thinking of Ace, and how troublesome he could be if Luffy was in any trouble, mild or not. Sanji almost had a panic attack when Luffy hadn't woken up. The idea of Ace's flames beginning to scare him. He was shaking Luffy only to find he was taking a deserved nap. You moron scaring me like that, Sanji said in annoyance, but fondness in his voice as well. Jin had woken from Luffy's haki, and stared down at his defeated captain walking past the pirates that had woken. He grabbed his unconscious captain and threw him over his shoulder. Everyone, we have lost. We should leave now while we even have a bit of dignity left for us, Jin said, and many who would have protested fell silent, getting up quickly to obey Jin. Hey Sanji, thanks for everything. I know you don't owe me anything at all, but when that kid gets up, can you tell him something for me? Jin asked Sanji, who didn't say a word. Tell him I'll see him in paradise. Jin used the word Luffy had called the Grand Line, which brought a smile to Sanji's face. Sure, now get out of here, and don't come back, Sanji said, shaking his head at the man, but turned towards some of the chefs. Go, and grab him that small boat we sometimes use. He yelled, only to get protests in response, but his look of anger that promised pain caused them to move into action quite quickly. Jin stood before the small boat that had everyone on it, but his eyes turned down to Luffy, who was snoring away happily. In Jin's eyes there was a new spark of fondness that many across the great seas shared for Luffy. Meat, more meat, Luffy mumbled in his sleep. Sanji smiled, his hair covering both his eyes now. I graciously accept this boat. I'm to take it that you don't want it back? Jin asked, but he knew the answer. Yeah, you can keep it, but don't ever come back here for anything at all, Sanji said, once again making sure that Jin knew he was no longer welcomed in this place. Jin sailed away, leaving a mess that needed to be cleaned up, but Sanji was happy it was just all over now. Why don't you take him up to your room, and let him rest? Zeph said, coming up behind them. Sanji looked up at the old man. What about cleaning up? He asked, but Zeph laughed. I've got plenty of people for that, and you're the most injured next to this kid. If I let him go back out there all damaged like that, his family will have all of our heads. Zeph laughed at the thought of having Whitebeard show up. Right, I'll leave this place to you then. Sanji lifted Luffy up, surprised on how light the kid was. I'll have to make you a good meal for fighting so hard. When Luffy woke up, he was surprised to be in Sanji's room. Oh, so you're awake. Sanji was leaning on the doorframe as Luffy sat up, yawning. I'm. He began, but Sanji held up a hand. Hungry, I know. Dinner's down in the kitchen waiting for you, but you're probably in a hurry, Sanji said, but Luffy was no longer listening since food had been mentioned. Food? He shouted, running past Sanji, who smiled, knowing full well Luffy couldn't concentrate on an empty stomach. When Luffy got to the kitchen, he found the chefs had made him a great meal, but no one else was eating. Hey kid, there's something else I need you to do, Zeph had said, suddenly breaking the silence everyone was causing. Luffy said, but didn't look up from his meal. I want you to take Sanji with you on your trip. Luffy stopped eating now to give Zeph his full attention. He's been chained to this place for too long. If he goes with you, he will have the freedom to achieve his dream, and find out the world is bigger than he could ever imagine, Zeph said to Luffy, who put his fork down on the table carefully. Nope, Luffy said, causing many of the chefs to drop their jaws at his single word. But you said, they had begun, but Luffy shook his head. I'm no kidnapper. If Sanji doesn't want to come, that's his choice. Luffy wanted Sanji on his crew, but there was no way he was ever going to force someone to be there if they didn't want to. Sanji was standing outside the room, listening, his head down, and eyes overshadowed. He knew that Zeph was just trying to help him out, but he owed his life to this place. Could he really leave it behind him? Sanji walked away, not wanting to hear any more of what was being said. He had a lot of thinking he needed to do. After his meal, Luffy ignored the chef's pleas for him to take Sanji by bursting from the room and wandering around a little. He knew he had to go soon since Nami was waiting for him, and his crew needed their captain, but he wanted to at least say goodbye to Sanji first. Finding Sanji wasn't that hard. The restaurant was a big ship, but not bigger than the one he had been raised on. Luffy, Sanji said once Luffy had found him, but the blonde didn't turn around from staring out at the sea. Hey. Luffy climbed up on the railing beside him, looking at the water as well. A moment of silence fell between them. Nay Sanji, do you still think of the all blue? Luffy asked, catching Sanji off guard. Every day. How old were you the last time you were here? Sanji asked him, eyes still set towards the sea. I was 14 going on 15. Luffy said, thinking about it for a moment. We've changed since then, haven't we? But Luffy wasn't sure he really had. Maybe, I dunno. He didn't like to stop and think about that stuff for long. You were the first person to not laugh at my dream, you know. Sanji said, a small smile gracing his face now. I don't laugh at dreams. That was the honest truth. Luffy would never laugh at someone's important dream. Luffy stood up. This was as good of a goodbye he was going to give to anyone. Luffy. Sanji had stood up as well, looking in the boy's direction now as Luffy looked back. Zeph was standing above the balcony looking down at the scene in wonder, hoping this kid had what it took to change his eggplant's heart. Your dream is crazy. Becoming the Pirate King won't be easy. Then again, though, my dream sounds pretty crazy as well, Sanji said as Luffy fully turned himself around to look at him fully. Sanji? He asked, wanting to know what was going on. For the sake of my dream, I will follow you on this trip to becoming the Pirate King, if you still want me, that is. Sanji said as Luffy's eyes widened and his smile grew. Of course I do. Luffy shouted, happy to have Sanji ready to follow him just as he had planned years ago. Zeph left the scene to prepare a small ship for his brat, filling it with stuff he may need to survive on these waters. Luffy was talking with a bunch of chefs while Sanji was packing his things in his room. Looking around his room, Sanji felt a tad bit sentimental. He was saying goodbye to a place that had given him life and happiness for so many years. Picking up a picture on his desk, he saw himself and Zeph when the restaurant was first established, and he smiled. Stepping out of the room, he looked back one more time, accepting now that his journey was about to begin. He closed the door, walking away. On the main deck, Sanji saw Luffy now in a boat with the two guys he vaguely remembered to be friends with that green-haired idiot. So you're finally leaving, brat? Zeph said from behind. Sanji, who had managed to hold himself back for so long, couldn't stop his heart from breaking at this moment. Take care of yourself. Zeph as well was holding back his own emotions. He had waited a long time for Sanji to want to go off on his own, but now that the day was here, it was harder than he had expected it to be. Turning around, Zeph was surprised to find Sanji bowing behind the other chefs present. Thank you for taking damn good care of me all these years, he cried out, which broke Zeph's resolve as he cried as well. Get going, brat, he said, his voice shaking but strong all at once. Sanji. Luffy couldn't wait any longer, but Sanji stared up at Zeph, even now their bond as strong as ever. Once he had said his silent goodbye, Sanji stood and followed Luffy to the small ship that began to set sail. Waving goodbye with Luffy, Sanji couldn't wait to see how this journey would play out, but more than anything he couldn't wait to see that beautiful Nami swan again. Luffy sat down and rested for a moment as Johnny and Yosaku took control of the sails, knowing where they had to go next. Nami, just wait, I'm coming.